Ta-da. Good morning, everybody. It is November 12th. Thank you all for being here. I'm just waiting for Amy now.
She's printing the budget to utilities that came in yesterday so that you all have them in hand. You all got them by email, but
Yes.
so I told her I would start taking notes.
Thank you very much. And the note should reflect that we have Mike Lannon on the phone. Wendy is not able to join us today, otherwise we have our complement of overseers, Mr. Castellanos and Mr. Pate. I think, no, it's been a little while since I think all of us are, well, some version of all of us are here. The first item on the agenda is to approve minutes of the October 8th meeting of the Board of Overseers. That went through, I think, 2 sets of edits online. I didn't see any notes regarding the last set that went around. I need a motion to approve those minutes.
Second.
That was moved by Dick and seconded by Vicky. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Right. Any opposed? Any abstaining?
No, we just forgot to vote.
You forgot to vote. That is all approved. That is unanimous. Thank you. Any questions or issues from Bayside residents or meeting attendees? This will be a good, swift meeting. I like that. Excellent. Thank you. Report of the President. I have some notes regarding various issues, but they show up later on during the agenda, so I think that I will save those. I'll just make a note to remind everyone, even though we'll say at the end of the meeting, that this is our final meeting of the year. Unless there's other discussion brought up during this meeting, we will, as is the norm, take December off and reconvene in January. And that will be on January 14th. So just to give you a heads up on that. Report of the treasurer, but our treasurer is now in the office, so he is coming to us right now. Ta-da! Sir, the ball is in your court. Thank you.
So, if you would pass those way. Pass those around. So, I guess my first question would be, we would typically have reviewed the third quarter at the last meeting that I did not attend. Would you like to do an in-depth review of where we are now, or more of a cursory review? Because none of you have had a chance to see this because it didn't get out to you in advance. I'm perfectly fine either way.
What's the will of the overseers?
How about a blend? How about an overview, but hit the highlights? Good.
And you have some warrants going about. Good idea.
Okay.
We're still on track with all of our previous reporting. We had some unexpected expenses that I need some clarification on. There were a $1,500 bill that I did not expect for adjusting storm covers.
Oh, that's on, that's it. Which, you know, the water stuff.
That's water expense?
Water stuff.
Okay, so that'll come out of there. That's good news because that improves the overall general government financials. And Dirigo Engineering for $350.
I don't know what that is. That may be.
Was that related to the fire hydrant? That was the second test on the fire hydrant, so that should be water as well.
Okay, so we'll chase both of those down.
There's just one thing that, when you said that, I forgot. Is the raising up of the catch basin on Bay Street, that's a village thing because it's storm drain, not sewer. So that might be, I don't know what the price was.
So if you could
Check that.
work with Amy, dig those invoices out, figure out where they ought to be. We had some other things that were coded to water incorrectly. A $3,000 expense for wharfs and floats,
Yeah.
which was Brock's work. I can't imagine how that happens because we've been doing this for years, but those need to be corrected. If we can pull those and get them squared away, that will help make sense of the rest of this.
It's good to know because that was one of the questions that came up on Friday on the water.
Yeah, so I guess the high-level piece is we're still in good shape. The more detailed piece are we have some questions I still need to research and answer, which I will do as quickly as I can. If you would take one of those, and this is the second sheet coming behind it.
This is, for people who are viewing this, we're now looking at the budget spending forecast numbers and the specific roof repair and other numbers. This is a generally monthly document, sometimes not, but that Steve keeps us up to speed on in terms of what are the projects that we're working on, what's potentially in front of us, how much money is available for our various projects. So that's what these refer to.
And that's a great overview. If you want to turn to the last page, which is the one with less information on it.
Piece of paper right here.
And go, I'm sorry?
It says wharf repairs at the top.
This one.
So the next to the last box says available funding. We have about $4,700 that we expect to be positive variances in operating expenses that's available to spend. $3,300 remaining in contingency funds, and $4,100 remaining in centennial reserves for a total of $12,262. So the caveats I would throw out are there are some expenses that you have spoken of in the past that are still up in the air, for lack of a better term. So not included in these numbers are expense for trees. Earlier in the year, the overseers authorized $10,000. We spent about $2,200. I don't have any idea what the impact of the most recent storm was. I know we have some payroll expense. I'm not worried about that. I think our payroll can absorb that. The question is, did we have external contractors or any other expense related to that?
That should be all your tree work.
So that's $1,200, which is not too bad at all, but reduce those available funds by $1,254.
And Bill, you think that that's pretty much it?
No, we'll have some bills for the repair of the causeway and dock, and we might have a couple. It should be the same person. There might be a couple other little things coming in, but I don't think there would be items.
Less than this, less than the 1,200 total.
I'm not sure on the repair of the dock. I'm not sure what that is. It probably is about around that same price.
It's still decided.
Okay.
Well, and I would also expect that we're going to have our fall tree work bill, which we've not seen yet. Unless everything got blown down, so we don't have any need.
They have not got back here yet to do what they had on their list yet, which the storm probably was a little late, so I haven't had any contact with them since the storm, so I don't know whether they are coming back this fall to do that, or whether it's just, spring.
So at any rate, out of that pool of funds, there are still some tree work that I would expect is going to come out of there. I don't think it would be more than a couple $1,000 if that's purely a number I'm pulling on my hat. Does that number sound reasonably?
Sounds about right.
So what I'll do is I'll plan on holding aside another $2,000 for tree work that's not yet complete.
May I suggest this to that since we did allocate 10,000 and that's supposed to include the replacement of the trees, that we get some active bids for putting trees in the ground before year end so that we can absorb that rather than rolling that expense over?
I haven't had a chance to talk with the tree warden. I think she was working on that, but I don't know.
My experience in Bath is if we get a tree in before Thanksgiving, it's safe to get it in. If the hard frost has come in, then no, you can't do it, but the hard frost isn't usually in until after Thanksgiving.
So I don't know where I am with her, because I haven't made any contact with the tree warden.
So maybe a different tack would be to say, we have about $12,000, if these forecasts are correct, $12,000 available to spend. That would exhaust our operating expenses, contingency spending, and centennial reserves. We already know, without planting trees, that we have something in the range of $3,500 coming out of that pool of money. And we had originally, and we also have set aside $8,000 for electrical in the community hall upstairs that has not been spent, is still available, but is not included in this number because that was the overseer's vote.
Where is that money?
Mike, we've set aside a reserve, so that was originally classed, if you bear with me 1 second. That was originally classed under contingency.
Okay.
So our current, sort of projected balance at the start of this meeting was $3,300. That would allow you to spend $8,000 on electrical, assuming that is still the will of the overseers.
Before we get to the 3,300, you're saying?
Yes.
So there's technically 11,000 in contingency, eight for the infrastructure and 3 here.
That's correct. And the 8 is the only money that has not been spent. Everything else that was originally approved has been spent.
Thank you.
And is there money set aside for the seawall still this year or not?
So I guess if you go back to my opening remarks, we've got a pot of money. And the earlier discussions from the overseers were that depending upon how we spent money, some of that could be used toward the seawall. So the open question is, are we going to spend $8,000 on electrical or are we going to spend $4,000? So if we spend $4,000, that frees $4,000 up for other purposes. And I'm not clear on exactly how that's going to shake out, Mike.
Okay.
And on paper, we've exhausted all of the contingency for tree work. We're going to have some additional expense on the causeway. So let's say we've got another $1,000 or $2,000 worth of miscellaneous expenses. The remaining could be used for any purpose the overseers decide to use it for. But what I want to make sure
On top of the 8,000?
Yes.
Okay.
So the questions I have are, where do the overseers want these funds to come from? Because if you look, you have 3 buckets in front of you: contingency, budget variance, and centennial funds. And if there's any of those buckets you wish not to touch, well, that reduces your available funds.
Judy?
I have a question in reply. We keep talking about this 8,000 for the upstairs. Does that include the code issues that are so important to us only, or is it code and stage lighting? In other words, it's part of...
I think,
Go ahead.
yeah.
No, you probably have the answer to that.
Yeah, I think it's really 3 buckets. It's the code issues, it's us doing upgrades for stage lighting, but it's also the fact that we don't believe we have enough surface for the stage lighting, so that's the 3rd bucket.
It was my understanding, this is Dick Brockway, by the way, my understanding that the 8,000 was for code work, and that the original number was 13,000 and included the office.
Right.
So, my feeling is that we only spent 500 for the office. Why aren't we talking 12.5 instead of 8?
Ned has a comment from the audience.
Yes.
Oh, hold on, wait.
Question. I think it would be helpful to answer the question.
Yeah, so with the,
That money's spent,
Right.
that's accounted for. We originally set aside the larger sum for the downstairs. When the real big bill came in, we adjusted and reallocated those funds to be used elsewhere. That's why that number's now 8,000. So the downstairs is a done deal.
downstairs is finished, we're now talking exclusively about upstairs. Ned, did you want to help us?
Yes. I heard you say that the capacity of service for the building wouldn't accommodate stage lighting. And there has been some rather major advances in using LEDs to light stages that has dramatically decreased the need for electrical upgrades. And I don't know if you're dealing with the old time when you had, 2,000 watt lights, or if you're now thinking in terms of stage lighting that takes advantage of, 100 watt LED lights. And I just wanted to caution you before you put in too much power in anticipation of the old school lighting that you may wish, and you may have thought of this, but it was a flag to me when I heard you say upgrading electrical service because of stage lighting, that there have been some, and just within the past 5 years, major advances that make LED lighting affordable, and of course they use a lot less electricity, and as a benefit, especially in summer events, they are mostly light and not heat.
there's a box of lights upstairs. They look like automobile headlamps. I have no idea whether
They're not LEDs, they're
Those
called
are frames.
PARs, and they use a lot of electricity still.
So,
Ned, I understand what you're saying, and I think the issue is we only have 100 amps available for the community hall.
Well, that's,
And
yeah,
even with LED lights, that's less than a newer home. You
No.
know, we were talking about upgrading it to 200, and I think you need that almost for just about anything you want to do. Do you not agree, or?
yes, I totally agree with you. I think 100 amp service for such a big facility is too low, even if you were neglecting the need for stage lighting. Yes, I had no idea that you only had 100 amp service.
okay, thank you. Bill?
Bill Cressy, in our infrastructure committee, Bill Cressy had said something about the lights that they could afford are LED, because that was something that I mentioned.
Okay, so let's leave that piece of it to the infrastructure committee. I think we're really talking about the dollar piece and less about the specifics of what's put in there.
I have a question though.
Vicki?
Just, do we have, I don't know anything about this, so a ballpark to upgrade electrical? Huh?
Eight.
$8,000 to upgrade electrical to 200,
No.
what they're talking
No.
about?
No,
No, I think we're talking about more than that. I think we're going to start with upgrading the electrical to the building, because you really want to start from the road to the structure. So, Billy got a rough quote the other day, that was $3,500, and we're not really sure exactly what is included in that building.
Okay.
Installation.
That satisfies my question, the road to the structure to upgrade, that's the big expense. But it says somebody, in the long run, and I don't know the difference between regular stage lighting and LED stage lighting, but we might want to have a comparison of that. And I don't know, anyway, it gets complicated, doesn't it? Sorry.
Judy?
$3,500 does upgrades, I know it sounds like a statement, but it's going to end with a question mark. $3,500 will bring in the upgrade to bring this building to 200, and that is general, and that will deal with safety issues, right?
Right, again, we're getting into the infrastructure part of it, but one of the issues that might not be included in that is the wire from the pole to the building. Is it compatible with 200, or is it only 100? And that would be an added cost that would go directly to CMP.
Judy?
So I think we're having this conversation in the context of Steve's question, where do you want to spend money for the balance of the year based on what we've set aside and based on these updated contingency reports and funding reports? And I would be comfortable committing to completing the conversation and expenses for the community hall, which has been estimated to be between $3,500 and $8,000 for the safety issues. Upgrading the electric to 200 and addressing the safety issues that MMA has told us to address. The stage lighting questions are different questions that require more input from Bayside Arts and Dick Brockway and Mike Lannon and all the smart people in the room. So,
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't going to be our approach, because we were trying to do it a little bit more cost effectively. I think if we were just doing it strictly cost effective and we didn't have the end of the year financial implications and the code issues being a priority, we would do it, we would install the box first, we would connect all the new things to the box, and then we would convert over the existing facility, and that part would be where we would eliminate all the code issues.
Mike, does $8,000 satisfy those needs?
I don't think I think we need 8,000 plus the 3,500.
So you're saying it's 11.5 to bring the community hall to code, make it safe, and take care of the capacity for the stage lighting?
Yes, that's where we are right now. We need to get more quotes on that to make sure, but that's what we're thinking.
Vicki?
Okay, so if I understand you, instead of going from the outside in, the idea is to go, for cost effectiveness, the inside out. Do the inside work, get everything hooked up, and then hook the outside to the inside, right? And would the $8,000 would do the inside work, but not bring us up to code. We could do that this year and then allocate monies for next year for the outside work. Does that sound, are you following me there?
Could I get clarification? You say bring us up to code. What code are you talking about? I mean, what?
The MMA code, apparently, from what I hear here, has to do with what's outside going into the building.
200 amps?
No, when I said MMA code, I meant the letter that started us on this conversation a year and a half ago from MMA, saying there's issues upstairs, address them. And it's now been a year and a half, and if we have the opportunity to address them, we should be addressing them. I mean, Maine Municipal Association, I'm sure, has told us to do this.
So just so correct, so that we understand how this conversation evolved, the impetus originally was from the MMA to address electrical issues in the community hall. At that, and subsequent to that, there was determination that we could also address performance needs in the community hall, and that's how these have gotten wrapped together. But there is an initial safety and capacity issue that's about that room upstairs before we talk about lighting particular reductions. So what you were saying, so I can understand it again and repeat it again so everyone understands, there is 8,000 set aside. You believe that an additional 3,500 is required to make all this happen. That's correct, Mike?
Yeah, $8,000 was the original estimate, and I wasn't involved in that.
Right.
But I'm trying to get a handle on exactly what that is. What I do know is that not included in that was the electrical service in the building, and we do have an estimate of that of $3,500. So as far as I can tell, it's the two of those together. And also, Amy, I'd love to get a copy of that letter, or Judy, if you have a copy of that, if you could email it to me.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know, it's John, I remember.
The original communication from MMA regarding this?
Yeah.
John, Amy or Bill would be able to pull that out.
Yeah, I don't have, anyhow,
It was John was.
let's talk about some resolution on this. Currently, there is 8,000 set aside. Will that satisfy the infrastructure committee for the rest of this year? Do we have to make additional decisions right now about additional allocations? Judy?
I like the way you just phrased that, John, because I am not at all comfortable with saying, well, it sounds like we're talking about 11,500 now, without rolling back into what exactly that 8 was covering and what this 3,500 is covering. So I would feel more comfortable committing to spending up to 8 on what it is the infrastructure committee would like to spend it on in an order of operations that gets us towards our goal.
Vicki?
I agree, but, and also, I leave it in the infrastructure committee's hands as to what order to do that, because they obviously have the expertise to decide. I mean,
Paul, Lee, Dick, any other thoughts on this?
Well, on the entrance, what we discussed was that we were going to also, because this is the type of thing where you ought to do everything to once when you're changing your service, is that I suggested we put in a, I forget the technical name.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Just need to hear a little better.
Try the one.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Lee.
When we were discussing the changing the electrical service up to 200 amp, we also discussed putting in a box that would be compatible for a future generator if we, but not, I mean, it's something that you really, if you're even thinking of going that direction, you ought to do it all at once, because it's cheaper than having them come back in later into it. And that's included in that 3,500, except for the switching over the wire from the pole. We don't know what that's.
I got a feeling that this is pretty much all my fault. We, in the infrastructure, had discussed with the overseers about spending the $8,000 to upgrade the wiring upstairs. And Billy had a quote for the whole building, and he got the office done very thankfully for very cheap. And in the following discussion, which I think the overseers had agreed that we were going to spend $8,000 to change out the wiring, the interior wiring, to make the building safer. And in discussions along that line, John Woolsey and Bill Cressy and a couple of others got very adamant about needing wires for lighting. And so I kind of said, well, let's toss them a bone and let's put some extra wires in just so they, you know, we'll spend some of our money putting extra wires, not hook them up, don't do anything with them. And that confused Billy to a point where he stopped pushing the interior work, and at that point we had to change the management of the infrastructure committee, and it's gone, I think, spiraling out of control right now, that we don't know where to go and what to do. My suggestion is we look at the inside wiring, we get those old tube and socket fittings out, and the single line wire, all of that frayed stuff, and RDX, and Romex, and all of that crap, and get the wiring up so that it's a reasonably safe building with 100 amp service. Then we can look at upgrading the service. Now, I understand that's not the most cost-effective way to do it, but the most cost-effective way is also the most cost. So,
No, that's what he said was the way to do the inside first and then hook up the outside wires. That's what he was.
last I heard, you said we ought to do the 200 amps first.
Yes.
Because
Yeah, we should install the 200 amp. My feeling is that you want to go for whatever is the biggest cost item, and everything else will work around that. If we run a bunch of wires now for the existing, and then it doesn't make sense because we're going to wire things that way, when then we're going to run larger wires to this other stuff. It seems like you get the infrastructure in place, and maybe we're talking about the same thing, where we're talking about getting all the wiring for the two of them organized, and then which part we bite off first is different.
Judy?
This is my concern. My concern is it sounds as though, particularly with the, as Dick just said, the change in leadership, that the 8,000 is driving this as opposed to the decisions we have to make. I would like to do this from the bottom up. What is the cost for what it is we want to do? Can we afford to do that? As opposed to, we have 8,000, what can we do?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
I would make a recommendation, we take the $8,000 and put it into a scholarship for the Portuguese World War II veterans.
That's not within our charter.
Steve?
I second it.
1 second.
So Mike,
I vote no on that.
Steve has a question.
can you hear me, Mike?
Go ahead.
Mike, can you hear me?
Yes, I definitely can, I was listening.
So, the voters approved a one-time carryover of any funds we don't spend in calendar 2017 that can be used in 2018.
Right?
So we've on paper said we're gonna hold $8,000 aside for electrical. The intent was to do it this year because it looked like we could get it done. There is no financial penalty for not doing it this year, mentally saying we're gonna hold that $8,000 for next year and then figure out what you need to do. You'll have $8,000 ready to go, then it becomes a challenge to figure out where the remainder of the funds, if there are extra funds needed, might come from.
Okay.
So just FYI.
That's great. So that's good to know. I mean, it would be my preference that I understand that the goal is to upgrade the electrical to the way it is, but I think there's some discussion that needs to be done with the art and how we want to upgrade what's there. Because I think those two things fit together if you're going to do it in a cost-effective manner. So my preference would be that we would spend the $3,500 to upgrade the service and then talk about the wiring and try to do it, at the very beginning of the year with the carryover money and whatever we need to appropriate at that time, so that we're not trying to jam it into this $8,000 number. We're going to come up with the best cost in the future January and February, and then get it done by the springtime.
Mike, if you think that that $3,500, what does that satisfy? Does that satisfy the safety issues upstairs?
No, that
No.
brings
No,
brings it to
no, it doesn't address it yet, but they're going, it's my understanding, you just said we went a year and a half without addressing that, and to me, you would upgrade the service so that every time you're wiring anything new, you're wiring into this new box. It's just, it's half the work if you do it that way.
Understood. So you're the head of the infrastructure committee. I propose that we allow you to move forward as you see appropriate based on these discussions. Judy, you're shaking your head no.
Well, the overseers have to make the decision, so I don't think that a direction to any committee to do the work is right, but I think what you're really saying is not a direction to Mike to go do what you want to do,
No.
but rather, that sounds like a sound plan, particularly with the reminder from Steve that we have money from this year we can spend next year, given the vote from the people who came. Do the overseers want to adopt that recommendation of starting with the upgrade from the box, from the street, and bring it in? I would make that motion. I think there's a lot of sanity to that.
And I'd like to amend that, Judy, if we could, to say that we wouldn't do anything upstairs, relative to either the code issues or the stage lighting till we came back to the overseas.
Right, so the authorization today is given, the motion would be, given Billy's Billy's reported cost estimate of $3,500, the overseers authorize the expenditure by the village of up to $3,500 to upgrade the box and power to 200 amps coming into the building.
Plus the transfer switch.
Okay, thank you, I didn't know the words.
Yeah, the only thing I would say about that is, his $3,500 was a quick phone call estimate, and I think it'll probably be around there, but it could be plus or minus 10% or 20%. So I would say we authorize it, expecting it to be $3,500, but knowing that we have the $8,000, and then it's really just to get the service in.
Hey, Mike, it's Steve again. We can't really, we can do one of two things. We can hold the $8,000 to that purpose, or we cannot hold the $8,000 to that purpose. So if a middle ground were to say, we'd like to go forward with what we believe is going to be a $3,500 expense, the overseers are going to approve holding $5,000, then that works from my standpoint.
Okay.
The second $5,000, the overseers would vote to hold for 2018 as a partial payment on the remaining electrical work to be done in that calendar year.
So I wouldn't be
Well,
comfortable.
the remaining 3,000 rather, I'm sorry, my math's not.
I was gonna ask how you divided 8 and got to 5.
Right.
Creativity.
We're still working on an original motion, which I believe has not been seconded because there's some
No.
clarification that's happening.
They seconded it.
I mean, the other option, Judy,
You're
is
gonna change it to
we
5.
hold it all and just get everything in order and vote on it in January, and we could still get it done by spring. So, we're not in a hurry to do this. It is the way it is. It's the way it's been for a while. So, that's another option if we don't feel comfortable that this is legit. I guess I would spur to Billy on that, if he's the one who made that phone call.
I think the $3,500 is legitimate, and taking your estimate that you can take a 10% margin, I would be comfortable changing the motion to $4,000. 10% of $3,500 is $350, which is what we usually do for a cushion for Billy. And since I do think there's a lot to be said for making the decision now and making the forward motion on this project that we've been talking about for a while.
Okay.
Hold on a moment now. So do we have an amended motion at 4,000?
The two, I don't know which one of you seconded. Paul, would you accept it to 4,000?
No.
No.
Are we gonna discuss?
Well, so let's go back then to the original motion, which is still 3,500. Yes, we can discuss.
All right. We have the added expense of enclosing the transfer switch. We want to make a little cabinet case to enclose it so it's not so hideous. That will require some carpentry. I like Steve's idea of putting a ceiling on it of 5,000. We may not expend all of that, but I think it's a safer bet that we're going to spend probably in excess of 3,500 and possibly in excess of 4,000. So 5,000, I think, works. Unless there's a
Do you think
comment.
He's saying 5,000 works for Paul.
As a safe buffer, because we have to enclose transfer switch.
No, but whatever we don't authorize and we don't use goes away, right? We can only then carry over 3,000.
Well, that would be a concern.
Well, Judy?
Billy, did the 3,500 include a cover and carpentry work?
No.
Okay,
Just the electric stuff.
okay.
Do I understand that the proposed funds would be coming out of the 8,000?
That is my understanding.
So that we're saying 8,000 minus whatever this figure is, which would leave a balance, and in 2018 calendar year, we would deal with that balance and any additional funds to address additional needs upstairs.
All right, so
Okay, yeah.
what if the motion were changed, Paul, to stating that our understanding is the electrical work is 3,500, that we expend the work necessary to do the transfer switch and the carpentry without a cap on it?
Without a cap, you just said 3,500.
No, that we have an estimate for the electrical work of 3,500.
But we gotta
That
make
we-
known for the cover.
Right, but we know that we can live within 3,500 and 8,000. This could be a really elegant cover. I'd be concerned about that. But
I have a cover on my transfer switch. It isn't gonna cost you more than 3 to
Yeah, we're not
4.
gonna. we're not
So
gonna-
it would
we're
be
not gonna
within
do
the
that.
margin, it would be within the margin, yeah, I was being sarcastic, of that I was proposing in any event, which is the 10% margin, but that doesn't give Paul comfort. So if we just say specifically the $3,500, and that we authorize the construction of the transfer switch.
It's not a hard estimate, the 3,500. It was a ballpark over the
Why
phone.
don't you set the maximum limit at 8,000? That's what we've got. If we don't spend it, we don't spend it, we carry it over. I mean, why?
I need a new motion, or this first one is not going anywhere.
Yeah, I'll withdraw the motion in light of that conversation.
I move we spend up to $8,000 for this new entrance box and the transfer switch, and whatever balance is left over, we'll carry it over for the upgrades upstairs.
Okay.
Is there a second on that? Paul is a second on that. So the motion is that the full 8,000 is available for essentially moving us to 200 amps and the transfer box for that. And any balance would be retained in 2018 for additional uses upstairs. Any further discussion?
Just don't spend it all.
All in favor? Mike, are you in favor?
Yeah.
Yes, that's unanimous. Thank you. So,
That's an effort.
still yours, sir.
I know what I need to know. So the next thing is, so you have some balances remaining. And is there, what do you want to do with the other outstanding expenses we discussed here before we went down the electrical path? So we had trees,
Yeah, I'd
right,
like to
at
get
about 3,500. What account do you want those to come from?
parks,
We don't have a park.
the net operating expenses.
Now that you need to understand is an estimated number. That may or may not exist. So if we have a winter storm that gets billed out early, that number could be depleted by $1,000 quite quickly.
Yeah, except if I look at your estimated variances to budget, right now you have a 4,500 estimated budget under parks, 6410. Oh no, that's a negative, sorry. Then I would want it to come from contingencies funding.
Okay, so we are going to, in theory, exhaust contingency for tree work, which is not sufficient for the tree work we just spoke of.
Right. And it's probably, I mean, if Jane doesn't get us the estimates for they're not going to get in the ground, but I would like someone to be addressing it. It's been something we've talked about for a while. We take a tree down, we put a tree in.
I think I have to enter the conversation now. I was going to address this further on, but Jane has resigned as tree warden. And I was going to address this later on because I thought it was going to be more of a personnel matter, but it appears that it's also going to affect decision-making in the near future.
Okay, then I will stop my conversation about replacement trees as long as it's part of the rollovers vote.
for if money left over. And we
Yeah, I
can
think
do it
the
in the
other way
spring.
we have somebody in charge of that now, right?
Well, we have the committee that Vicky's involved with and John's involved with. So rather than continue to go down that rabbit hole, why don't we
Yeah,
talk about it
I
in
think
spring?
I would concur, I think we put that as a separate thing and talk about budget then, because my thought with the committee was one thing was for them to come up with a budget rather than it to be sort of a hit or miss thing.
I mean, the other thing I'd like to see on contingency is sort of the seawall stuff, but again, all that can be done next year too, so it's not, nothing needs to be rushed.
Let's deal with what Steve's asking right now, which is the tree expense of 3,500 and where it comes from.
Okay,
Well, we're going to roll that into 2018 conversation, so we don't have an answer to that question.
Well, no, so let me back things up a little bit. I would appreciate direction on how you want the $12,000 we have remaining, that at least on paper we have remaining, spent. And if there's money left over, it's gonna roll forward. If there isn't money left forward, it's a moot point. And so maybe a simpler answer is, we will always go to operating expenses first, if we can. But that's a number we don't know about right now. That's a best estimate. Contingency is real money that we have, Centennial reserves are real money that we have. So, are you taking the position that as we do the tree work, we do the causeway repair, we do the things we need to do in those lights, that if it exhausts $7,000, which would be contingency and Centennial, that's fine?
I would think that would probably take up about everything. That's my perspective on it. East Side Arts isn't gonna be happy when we spend it, but they
Well, I was going to
think
say,
it's their money.
the Centennial funding has to, the Centennial money has to be coded towards the expenses that are authorized by that vote, which are for the facilities, for the provision of arts or arts themselves. So for instance, we can't code the causeway repair
Right.
to the Centennial Fund line.
But all the electrical and all.
The electrical certainly is for the facilities therefore.
But we've already set aside 8,000 towards the electrical, so I would think we're discussing a dead horse right now, we don't need to discuss it.
Well, that's not correct. You have 8,000 that you've authorized us to take from contingency. So the overseers could say, look, here's what we want to do. We're gonna take some of our prior decisions, which include window restoration, which include electrical authorization. You have the list in front of you of all the different things you've approved. And we're going to move some segment of those expenses, or we're gonna use the funds from Centennial for some segment of those expenses. I'm fine with whatever you decide. I just need someone to direct me. Because at some point, these accounts are going to be increased or depleted based upon your decisions. I just need to know what I'm supposed to do.
Okay, as far as current things, do we have current bills for the tree work?
I believe I have it right here. I believe that's all so far, with the exception of what was in place before the storm that hasn't been done yet.
So
I'm
we
not
have
sure
one
what that
invoice for $1,200.
A recent invoice
Yep.
for 12?
We just had a discussion about approximately $2,000 of additional tree work that we expect needs to be done.
That we had talked about.
That brings us up to about 3,500. That does not include planting trees.
Put that aside.
How about, okay.
So the 12,262 minus 3,500 brings us to 8,762 roughly. After trees, we still have 8,700 in the accounts.
After the 3,200 for the tree?
Exactly.
Okay.
We're down at the 8,700 or
So
so.
we proceed with the tree work. And then, oh, then we have the causeway.
I believe, there's no way that the Centennial reserves, as Judy's indicated, can be used for anything other than arts-related activities.
No.
Whether they
No,
are
no,
this
that's-
building, including this building.
Right.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I understand that. This structure and the arts that occur therein. But they can't be used, Centennial reserves cannot be used for the causeway or for trees or for fixing Maple Street.
We can build a gazebo.
We can build a gazebo and perform arts therein, correct.
I
Judy?
Would you, I'm gonna pose this to the two of you, Paul and Lee in particular, because you guys process these things well. And all of us do, but I trust your instincts. Can we redirect the vote we just made as to the infrastructure money, the $8,000, and direct it to come from Centennial funds in the first instance?
That's what I do.
And then another 4 out of the,
And then to the extent that the Centennial funds are exhausted by that expenditure, then that will come from contingency, so it's flipping the direction you just made. That stops the conversation about what Centennial monies were for. That moves us forward and increases the Centennial, the contingency fund that we can use for these other things we've been talking about.
So, for the clarification of those who are watching, this is suggesting taking that $8,000 and rather than drawing on that specifically for the upstairs upgrades, that Centennial reserves, which are currently $4178, would initially be used for those upgrades. Is that correct, Judy? And that $8,000 is then in reserve still, or sitting in contingency years, as Steve indicated, it comes out of contingency anyhow. So we first exhaust Centennial reserves to quote-unquote fix the upstairs.
And this is all coming out of the 12,262, right?
Yes, it's part of that, what 12,262 is this?
It first comes out of the 8022, which is what 4178, which he has there for Centennial reserves, to the extent we spend more than 4178.
If I
Second
could
page.
get all of you to go to the last page of this document I sent, it's along with my hand scratching because I didn't have a chance to get it done.
Yeah.
I'd like you to change a number. Next to contingency spending, it says 3306. Please change that to 11306.
Because you're taking out that $1,200 bill you have.
No, because
No,
I'm
adding
taking the 8,000 of electrical, putting it back in. I now consider the electrical to
11,000.
be unapproved.
Okay.
1106 meaning
11,000,
106.
11,000.
11,000.
He's adding
8,000.
11306, because you're adding back in 8,000.
Right.
So since we haven't spent the electrical, this is really what you have for money. This is unspent funds.
How much is that total?
The total now is gonna be 20,262.
That includes you adding the 8 back in.
That's
Yes,
right.
correct.
Okay.
And Mike, we did this just to try to get us past the different buckets we have.
Yeah. Here's the big pile.
Yeah, so now we have this pile of money. And if you wanted to do electrical now, based upon what I understand Judy is asking, we would say, well, we want to spend 8,000 on electrical, where do we want the money to come from? About half of it would come from Centennial, the other half would come from contingency. That means that the Centennial fund would go to 0, contingency would drop from 11,000 to 7,000.
Thoughts on this?
And where did that 8,000 come from?
So what we had done before was reserved 8,000 for contingency, right, the back in the numbers, so we reduced contingency.
And somewhere else in all of this?
Right,
Yes,
right in the
first
first
page.
page of what you have in front
You'll
of you.
see that $12,000 number, you'll see that we spent 388, sorry.
Which number? Which,
Look under contingency budget spending,
Yeah.
look about one halfway down, you'll see electrical work.
That was a office electrical, right?
Right, and then we have the $8,000 number in
all right,
our
so
wish
you
list.
saved some money there and you're applying it to,
No, that's the wrong path. So if you go to the page that has it writing on the bottom,
yeah,
and you look at the very first line,
yeah.
and it says wharf repairs, the line underneath that is second floor electrical work, reserve written next to it,
Okay,
that's your $8,000.
okay.
So right now, we have on paper said,
It's because we saved that amount.
we set that money aside to use for electrical. So I had taken it out of the available funding totals at the bottom of that sheet. All I've just done is added it back in to perhaps make it easier for people to look at what we have for available funds and decide how you'd like to use the funds that you have.
May we have a motion on the
Just reallocate it.
allocation of funds, the order of allocating funds? Judy?
Of the up to $8,000 that we have authorized to be expended on the upgrade of the electrical, I move that we expend first $4,178 from the Centennial Reserves, and the balance, if necessary, to do the connection from the pole, the transfer switch, and the box that we've authorized, come from contingencies funding.
Is there a second on that?
Better run that by me.
Vicky is the second.
My second, no,
Now we can discuss.
What we have authorized so far in terms of electrical work is pulling the 200 amp power from the pole, the switch, the transfer switch, and the construction of a box for the transfer switch. That's what we've said, we're gonna do that. We've said that we have a over-the-phone estimate for that for $3,500, but that might not be reliable, particularly when you figure in the carpentry for the box. So we've said you can do that work. We've authorized that work being done. We've authorized that up to $8,000 can be spent on that, even though the only estimate we have is for $3,500. To the extent that it is going to be spent at all, the first $4,178, which is the pencil number here, comes from Centennial. Anything over that, for that specific work, will come out of the contingency. Any work over what we've authorized would still have to come back here. LED lights, halogen lights, stage lights, all of that we still have to talk about.
That's your motion.
That's my motion.
I second.
It has been seconded. We're in discussion. Any further discussion?
I thought the 8,000 that we originally voted on for electrical, if there's a surplus after the primary is changed to 200 amp service, that would be applied towards the remainder of the electrical work needed in the community hall.
But we have to define what that work is.
And Mike has said that he would come back at or before the January meeting and tell us what the next step is and how much it will cost.
That doesn't change that we've set aside work for electrical. It just means we have to look at what that work over and above the work we've already approved is.
And so what
Right. And it's probably gonna be more than 5, because, they can have that estimate of 8 before just to do the upgrade.
right,
So-
we understand.
So what do you want to do with your current motion?
1 second here, Steve.
I think I can simplify this. The overseers have approved $8,000 toward electrical work. Right? We don't need to discuss that, that's a done deal. On the table is a question and a motion that I would like to see as to how you would like to come up with those $8,000. In my estimation, the motion should be, we will fund the electrical work by exhausting the contingency fund of $4,178, the balance to come from contingency.
That's what the
It's
motion
done.
is. That's what the
It's
motion
also
is.
Centennial.
Centennial.
Sorry, yes.
Exactly.
And the remainder to come from contingency.
Right.
That's
That's,
that's the accounting piece.
pardon me?
Isn't that what you said?
That is what I said.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Is there any, so that is our understanding of the motion, which is that the 8,000 is initially to be used by drawing on the 4,178 in Centennial, then going to contingency, which is currently now $11,306. Any further discussion? All in favor? All in favor. Mike, are you in favor?
Yes.
Yes, that's unanimous. So, thank you, Judy, because among other things, I hope that this will end the Centennial Reserves issue.
Not as much as I.
Well, well, and none of that would have been organized if it weren't for everybody's brain power around here, so
Good.
thank you, all of you.
All right, so that, Steve, does that help you?
Oh, immensely, immensely.
We did, as far as the tree work, in terms of additional tree expenses that we might get bills for this year, I'm assuming that would come out, well, I don't know where that would come out of.
Well, that's what let me
That's the next
recalculate, if you
question.
can bear for a commercial pause.
My question was, everything that's been done, we've received a bill. We're not pending any bills, so we've got what we've got, and then it's to move forward to do what we had talked about. Okay, and then to talk about, yeah, and another.
So for ease of continuing the discussions, if you've written 11,306 on your sheet, the new number is 7,484.
Yes, remaining.
So that's what's remaining.
And 0 in Centennial.
0 in Centennial.
740.
Got it.
And, well,
I was gonna
you
mention
seem so excited.
while you were.
No, well, you were looking for where we want to spend it.
Well, I was
And
gonna
so that
say,
was-
you've already spent some.
Right,
So
but,
I was gonna continue and tell you what you've already spent.
okay, I think that's where I was going to.
Mike, are you still there?
Generator.
Yes, I am, yes.
I heard a phone ring.
And our realtors.
So you have authorized an anticipated $3,500
add
for tree work
value to the resale
in general.
on your home.
But we've got bills for
And-
200.
You have
Right.
bills for 1,200,
30. Some, what was it, 2,000?
1,200.
Yeah, the one we just got was
And in
12.
that 3,500 is the 12.
Oh.
So there's 3,500 that's coming out for trees. And the reason I say it's coming is we haven't paid that bill. So I view that as being part of that bucket.
Right, exactly, but there wasn't there a 2,000 bill somewhere in
There's no bill.
Not yet.
So expectation
there?
is
No,
we'll spend
2,000
another
for the further,
2,000.
okay, great.
Plus
For the
12.
stuff we've already talked about.
Well,
Okay,
I call it 3,500.
I feel like
It could be
no,
30,
no, no,
we can
no, no,
change
no.
it, don't make any difference to me. So that leaves you about $4,000. Now, we're gonna have a causeway bill that we haven't seen yet.
Pipes.
What's 4,000? What's the bottom line of all these adjustments?
That's what I'm talking about now, is that we have about $4,000 in contingency after the adjustments we've talked about so far.
I thought it was 7,484.
We just dropped 3,500 trees out
We
of
just
it,
took trees out of it.
which is right.
And you're gonna have some causeway repairs and other stray stuff, which, $1,000, Bill? Is this Dean doing some stuff? So there's another $1,000 that's gonna come out for what I'm gonna call wharf and causeway, whatever you want.
Still out of contingency?
Yes.
Is that damage from the storm?
Yes. So what you have remaining for contingency funds now, estimated basis, is about $2,500. And we're hopeful that the budget's gonna come in spending about $5,000 less than we budgeted, because we have a number of expenses coming in below budget, so.
We do the upstairs electric.
Judy?
So one of the questions that had been posed was the engineering work to start the seawall discussion. We have, if we look under our waterfront restoration line of 6490, we have spent only 1,000. Should we be talking about getting that engineer underway?
So, which document are you looking at?
I'm looking at your budget forecast. I'm looking at page 1, estimated variances to budget, where you have a 1,000 positive, but that's one of the things we can carry forward, right?
Well, so go up to wharfs and floats.
Yeah, 2,000 negative, okay.
So really, from a wharf and float standpoint, I view us as being, we've exhausted, don't look at the individual lines in this top
Yeah.
piece, because they will change. So if for some reason Dawson Smith has to do some extra bookkeeping work, we may not save $6,000, we may save $5,500.
Okay.
If road maintenance, right now, that number that's in there looks to be good, except that we know we've got to pull 1,500 out because it should be charged to water.
Yeah,
So we might be in better shape, but that's a squishy number with 2 months to go.
okay. So my point was, you were looking for what expenses, and Mike was looking for what expenses can we spend now, and the waterfront project that we'll be putting before the villagers in August for approval will need some engineering. Should we get that engineer underway now, or do we wait until January, February?
Lee?
The way I'm looking at it, we're shaving the animal pretty close here. And I'm not comfortable getting down to 0. I'd be a lot more comfortable to put off that till January, because we don't know what's gonna happen between now and January. We could have a hell of a storm. We could have a snowstorm. We could have a rainstorm. We could have another windstorm. We don't wanna be down to 0.
What's left in the pot?
Currently, what's left in the pot is the 4778 in net operating expenses. That hasn't changed.
Yeah.
If you subtract trees
What's the bottom line?
And Causeway Wharf, you're at 2,500 in contingency, so you put 2,500 and 4778 together, and you're at 7,000 and change. So that's what Lee's suggesting is don't touch that 7,000 and change right now,
I can live with that.
because we don't know what's
So
happening in
we
the next 6 weeks.
depleted Centennial Reserve,
To zero.
right? So the only two figures we're looking at are net operating expenses and contingency spending, right?
Correct.
I'll write this up, Amy.
So that's 7,000.
And change. Let's call it 7,000, all right?
Yeah,
We don't know what, just as Kaz has said, we don't know what the hard and fast, and I'm just not comfortable getting down to zero.
yeah.
I think that's
And,
fair.
and so I think the easy answer is, there's no funds for engineering this year. But if these funds come true and we have 7,500 left over, that goes into 2018 and can be used.
Yeah, and at the very beginning of the year too, so.
So,
And you also have a fairly large sum of money set aside for engineering next year, which I think it was 15,000, is it?
Yes.
Yes, 15, yeah.
So January 1st, Mike, you've got 15,000 that the infrastructure committee set aside for engineering-related expenses.
Okay.
you hear that, Mike?
I couldn't hear exactly the end of that.
Well, so the bottom line is that I think that the mood around the table is we ought not to look for spending any more of this contingency stuff. We'll wait till January before
That's
we.
fine, yeah, I gotta work on a scope work anyway, so, I do want some direction when we get to the infrastructure portion of it, but that's
Understood.
fine.
Okay.
I do have a question that may be more appropriate for village agent, but since it's on spending, is it worth our while to get our dock inspector to come down for a special inspection to see what impact the storm had on the dock? I mean, I know you were freaking out about the dock actually maybe even washing away. Have you seen things come loose?
What I can tell visually, looking at it from my thing, everything looks still intact.
Okay, that's all I need to
I think we're okay, I don't think we need to.
hear. Okay, thank you.
Steve, you have the direction you need.
I do, thank you very much.
Is there anything else you need to address?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
We used a budget workshop schedule last year to develop our budget, and if you think that approach worked and would like to do it again, I'll develop another schedule.
That worked great.
And I have a document that I think I need Vicki and Paul to sign for banking. And that's all I have. Thanks very much.
Thank you. That was extensive and exhaustive, but appropriate. We really need to get through all those things. And at the end of the year, so since we're not meeting next month especially. Mr. Page, it is your turn at the podium, the village agent.
I don't know where I'm at. Last meeting, we done the thing on the moratorium agreement between the road maintenance and catch basins between the town and here. And I guess when we sent what information we had to the town, there was an addition on the bottom of that was for us to share the cost of taking care of our street catch basins, not the town's catch basins during storms. They do not want that way. They want it the way it was originally. So they made up a new sheet with that excluded off of it. So their road commissioner is supposed to take care of all catch basins throughout storms.
But we reimburse them by half the cost,
That's to take care of during storms.
just doing
Okay.
so.
Now, the other part, which we went over last time, was when we started a drainage system to do away with ditches and things, the village and the town got together. The town said they would pay half the cost, and we would pay half the cost of installation of catch basins. Now, there's a maintenance to that. We also share half the cost of the maintenance to that with the town. When we have that big truck come in and clean them out, get all the debris out of them and all that. That hasn't changed. They want to keep with that same agreement, which is fine. So I have given this, had this part rewrote, and we sent it back to Barbara, and I am not sure, because I haven't got it back yet, whether the town fathers have put their signature on.
It's going to be discussed tomorrow night.
Okay.
And then I'll sign it as,
Well, I already got your signature. You did sign it last
Last
month.
month, yeah.
The other thing that came with that, and I was trying to find it on here, and I can't find it, and Amy may have it somewhere, is when they sent this back to us, the town is still very upset about the Malone property. And they had said on that paper, and I wish I had it, that they want us to be responsible for plowing Griffin Street, because their plow guy does not want to hit that house, that porch.
But the building permit that their employee issued allowed the house to be where it is.
They put up granite border around it, which goes
Oh, so it's
out
not the
into the
house.
street.
not the house proper.
No,
Not the house
it's
proper. If
it's
you go
the
by,
granite.
there's granite boulders that go out into further. I mean, the porch went out as far, I guess, because, I was questioning that when I saw it go up. But apparently the granite borders go further, so they gotta pick up the granite borders.
Lee, Paul, sorry.
The Malones came before us some time ago because they were advised by John Lassen, the code enforcement officer, to get our opinion, and we okayed their cantilevering into the town right-of-way, or is the village right-of-way, 2 feet. But they went a little more, they went 4 feet. And since then, they put a skirt around what they constructed. So they're 2 feet further into the right-of-way with an extension of the skirt, plus the granite like Vicky was saying. So the road commissioner has an issue with plowing the snow because he thinks his plow with the extra wing will hit a lot of that stuff and it just can't get through. So that's where we are. We have to deal with a resolution of that matter, whether or not we're going to have our guy plow that area or whether we're going to ask Malone to make the corrections.
Take the rocks out.
If they remove the granite, would that give them, or the granite around that corner? It goes from around the corner, down the street.
And they want, the selectmen think that the stones that are there too on George Street should be removed because those are going to be an obstacle.
Sounds to me like it's a code issue, it ought to be taken up by the code enforcement.
Well, it's two different issues. Is if they built beyond what the permit said, that's a code issue, and the code enforcement officer should be looking at whether or not there's violation. It sounds as though it's the stones, and that's a road commissioner issue on Griffin Street. I mean, George
and Griffin.
is we plow Griffin, don't we?
No,
Oh, they plow Griffin?
town knows, that's what this is about.
Okay, so then the town has to talk to them.
Well, the
Because,
town has talked to them.
and what has he said?
The last, I had a meeting, oh God, I remember now, a little while ago, with Barbara Ashley and the road commissioner over there at their house. The road commissioner measured his road, and he says it's clearly, those rocks on George Street are clearly in our right-of-way.
Right.
Then they talked to me, and they said, okay, what's the width of your street, which is Griffin Street?
Right.
So I said, okay, clearly, the house is out over the limit of the road.
Well,
Now, there is granite down on Griffin Street, okay? Malone says before there was railroad ties there, but they were down in the ground, they were flush with the street. They were flush with the street, they weren't sticking up. So Malone has granite down along there now, and I believe that granite is setting on hot top.
Yeah.
And that's made that road wider at the top.
So the town just has to enforce their plow, if they're the ones that plow it and they're the ones that gave the permit, they're gonna have to, well, first of all, the granite's not permitted.
Right.
So if it's in the right of way, it needs to get out of the right of way.
Right.
So the town needs to deal with that. I don't think that's our issue.
Paul?
No, the issue is they don't want to plow Griffin Street.
Yeah.
Paul?
And is there any other place that there's gonna be any encroachment on any of our streets, they're not gonna plow?
Well,
Paul?
The Malones were encroaching in the right-of-way with the original house. And when they came here, we told them if they set the post back outside the right-of-way, we'd allow them to cantilever 2 feet. So that's kind of additional information as to what happened.
Well, what we don't want to have happen is have a winter storm come and have the town of Northport not plow because this is an unresolved issue. Vicki?
So we want the town to plow Griffin Street,
Right.
okay?
and they have a contract to plow it.
Right,
with us.
okay, and I don't blame them for not wanting to plow. It's gonna destroy their plow because somebody put granite blocks in the middle of the street. So the appropriate thing is to have a conversation with these people, the Malones, is that? And ask them to remove the granite on the side of the road so the plows can get through. They're not here, obviously, in the wintertime, so they don't maybe understand the extent of this obstruction and what it,
Well,
Judy?
what I don't understand is why isn't the town willing to undertake that conversation directly? If on Beach Hill Road,
I think they have. They
okay,
have.
so if Beach Hill Road, if someone was in the right of way, they would talk to that property owner and say, you're gonna have to move your rocks.
They have.
They have to do that here too. I don't
They're
think they,
they're in that argument right now.
so I don't think they can make it our issue, except that I know that if they're saying they won't plow, we'll make another year-round resident unhappy, because what is the name, the lady, the realtor, Marjorie.
Right.
Marjorie's right there. We don't, if it is not plowed, then a year-round resident is gonna be interfered
Well,
with.
you have 4 year-round residents on that street.
All right, so.
Are we willing to plow it at our own expense, with our own plow?
Lee?
Looks to me like, looks to me like the town is kind of throwing it in our lap because the stones are there. And the other thing you want to think about is if we as a body allow the stones to remain there, who's the next one that's going to do it? And it's just going to be a continuing problem. So maybe we ought to bite the bullet, send them a registered letter saying these rocks have to be removed by such and such a date. If they aren't, we will remove them at a cost to them.
Vicki?
I'm not sure the town is asking us to take care of it. The town is in a discussion with them, I'll be clear. Okay, and nobody knows where this discussion is yet.
No, the only thing that they told us is if they can't get it resolved, that we will have to plow it.
Okay, so nobody knows if this is resolved yet.
Is
So-
there value in having the Northport Village Corporation, separate from the town, contact the Malones?
Yes.
I think we should, because we need to know if it's resolved and if we're gonna get a
Yeah.
bill or not for plowing that road.
Mike, you were saying something?
He said yes.
I think yes is the answer, yes. We should contact them and tell them that if they want to pay to plow the road instead of moving their granite, they can do that. Otherwise, they need to move.
Billy?
Absolutely.
My recommendation is
down pretty soon.
somebody official from the overseer should contact the town administrator and get it directly from her.
As to where it is
That's
now.
where it is now, between the town and them.
Well, we're having a meeting tomorrow night. I'll do that.
But this requires some sort of immediate action, because we don't have a meeting in December. It's
Right.
gonna snow,
Right.
okay?
But, I mean, officially, we're calling the liaison here.
Paul's the liaison.
They need, we need to take a stand now, so they know where we are, and it needs to be in writing, so that if it does snow tomorrow, and they've got granite there, and our road is not plowed, who is responsible, and who's gonna pay for it?
This is my concern. My concern is that I want the town to understand that it is not our problem, and therefore, while we want it solved for them, we will not be the agent for the solution. I think they would love it if we were the ones who were directly in the Malone's face. I think instead, a letter from the president that Paul can direct and address at the meeting that says, we discussed it, we agree with you wholeheartedly, town, that no obstacles ought to be in the right-of-way, and we endorse any action that you take against these homeowners for blocking the right-of-way. But it's their problem, and I don't want to absorb their problem.
Right, and I don't want us plowing that road
Right.
because nobody's taking, taking a stand and informing, again, communications, everything, inform these people of what the consequences are is not.
So I would like to direct the president to deliver that letter through Paul tomorrow night. And that way they know we're allied with them, that we will endorse their action against a friend and neighbor, and that nothing we've done should be treated as endorsing this trespass into the right of way.
I will say that green looks very lovely.
So I will, I don't think we need a vote on this necessarily, but I think I'm being directed to write a letter, I'll send it electronically to you, Paul, that will indicate that we agree that the town has responsibility for plowing George Street and Griffin Street without any obstacles, and that we endorse any necessary actions they need to take to make sure that their plowing is safe and appropriate, et cetera, et cetera. I'll get that off to you and you'll have it by tonight.
Do we have to make a motion on that, or?
I don't
Well,
believe
I-
so. If you
my
want
view
to,
is
go
that
ahead.
we should, so that John has the cover of because the municipal officers are, us. So I move that that the president of the corporation of the village direct a letter to the town to be delivered by Paul Nyren as discussed.
I second it.
All right, any discussion? All in favor? It's unanimous. That'll go to Barbara from me.
Okay, the fence going into Bayview Park is ours, and one of the tree limbs that come off the big tree there broke up one piece, but it's all rotten, it needs to be replaced. It doesn't need to be replaced right now, we can do it next year, but I just wanted to bring it up that we need to replace it. I know that I had a conversation sometime this summer with the Obergs, who own the property there. They were wondering if the fence was replaced, if it could match their fence coming up the side, just the way the boards are shaped, if we were gonna replace it. I said we didn't have any plans to replace it at this time, but now that the trees hit it, knocked it down, we gotta replace it.
And my answer to that question would be, we would be happy to match the aesthetics of an adjoining fence as long as it doesn't increase the price. So if the fence now would cost us $50 and to make it match theirs is $100, they'll have to pay the $50 difference.
Which fence, Jay?
This is down by the Obergs,
It's in the
Bayview Park, at the base of Bayview Park.
Yeah, she called me about it too, yeah.
But apparently we installed the fence originally.
Yes,
It's our fence.
yes, it's on our property,
It's pretty rickety.
yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
We put it up because the owner that was in the house across the street tried to drive down over that back times.
Yeah.
We put a fence up to help cover us. We had something there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I agree with Judy, we could put 3 or 4 posts in there for very little money and be done with it. So if you still wanna do it, it's kind of, we'll put the difference.
Okay. So, tree damage we had around the village during this last storm. We have 2 pine trees on Bayview Street that need to be replaced, they're gone. We had 1 big oak on the bottom of Blaisdell Park that needs to be replaced. We had 1 smaller tree on West Street near the top that needs to be replaced, which is gone. The apple tree at the library, we put some stuff underneath it because it just pulled up out of the ground. It looked like the major root system was still intact, so we're gonna stand it back up, brace it so it won't fall over, and we're gonna see if it re-roots. We hate, we don't wanna lose it because it was a good tree. Also trim some of the top branches off and give it some different shoots. I mean, it was doing good. So we're trying to save that one at the library. If it doesn't work, then we'll have to replace it. I thought we'd try that first. So that's the extent of that damage. We had limbs and things all around the village that come down. But
Those are the public owned trees
Yes.
that came down.
Yeah.
Vicki?
So my question is, okay, the charter says we replace trees when they come down, is that when we take
The
them
tree
down?
ordinance, the tree
The
ordinance.
tree that says when we take them down, or when Mother Nature takes them down?
When any tree is lost on public property, that it needs to be replaced in the approximate same location.
And we've agreed that for the moment, we'll discuss this further, but this may be a 2018 issue in terms of replacement.
But it's good that have a list, that's really helpful, something we haven't had in a long time, so thanks.
And a lot of other branches all over the village parks, some of the roads. The dock fed, okay, at one point I was like, geez, that doesn't look good. At high tide, it didn't look good down there at all. We went through it, it held up, we had causeway damage, of course. The North Shore seawall, everybody's been worried about. That handled it like a trooper, we just got a little bit of wash back on top, we need some gravel in it, and some rocks. All the sand that was there, for the people that were kept saying, well, we need to put them old mooring blocks up there. If you go down and look at it now, you'll see where we put old mooring blocks in the past there, because all that sand's gone now. By springtime, we'll have a spring storm and that sand will come back.
So it goes between the 6-foot and the 10-foot seawall,
Yeah, yeah.
depending on the time of year.
And it held up good, and the waves, the top of the wave when it curled was at the top of the handrail thing. So it really had some big waves against it. Coming rolling right in across. Didn't get hit directly straight in, which was good.
Yeah, the angle was favorable.
Yes, yeah. So that held up well. The dock held up well. We had just, 2 weeks before that, we had just got the repairs of the bracework done by Prop. Thank God. Because they had planned on coming one day and then something happened, they couldn't get there, and they said, well, we'll be there and such, and I said, we really need to get this done, so we put something else off to come done, of course, so they've been very accommodating on that. Road washouts and things, we've done fairly well on that. We didn't get as much rain as we thought we was gonna get out of that. So overall, the village held up pretty good. There was a lot of private people that didn't fare so well, with, roof damage and a total house mess. And a lot of trees on some of the town streets. So everybody that was in the village and some of the storm chasers were all trapped in the village for a couple days.
That's right.
We had power lines down, Bluff Road had power lines down, telephone poles down, trees, big trees mixed in with the wires across the road. Shore Road was the same thing, telephone poles down, wires down, trees mixed in with the thing. So as through the fire department and that, we worked through it to try to get the place so we could at least get out. So we had to work on that. Because CMP just was very scarce at the time. Very. So a lot of people were mad because they couldn't get out of Basin. So what are they going to do? Well, it's a natural disaster, storm. There's nothing you can do,
Hey, yeah.
3 streets are blocked, you can't get out. Well, that's the only way out.
Mike, were you going to say something?
No, yeah, it was all safety issues.
Right. So, just wanted to put that out there. We were out of power around here for what? 4 days, 5 days? Yeah, some was 5, some were 4.
Two.
So,
You were less than a lot of Maine that was out a week plus, I'll tell you.
Some people still are.
So Billy won't say it, but we are, once again, have much to be thankful for to Billy and Bernie and Amy and Dick McElhaney. The sewer system was working. It's amazing with all of the destruction. You look at the houses with the blue tarps on the roof and Bob and Suki's house, it's amazing how it held together.
and I really appreciate it. I know you all.
The generator at the pump station was going for days,
Yeah, had to.
days and days.
The one on the shore road was going for days and days and days, and the one down at the treatment plant, you know, got a small tank on it. I was doing a lot of running back and forth day and night to keep it going, but we did it. Because we have to comply with our mandates reporting, and I also still have to do the sampling, take water bill, so we done it all. It wasn't easy, but we got it done.
Yeah. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Yes.
ADA
ADP?
is the defibrillator
Correct.
thing that we share back and forth, that comes here in the winter. Beanie has left to go back, she had to go back to work, and that machine would not charge. She called the company says it's still on warranty, the company says, well, let's not fool with it, we'll send you a new one. When you get the new one, send that one back. So she's had that made out, so it's gonna come to me, and then I'll charge it, make sure that it works, and then we can put it back up here in the community hall for the winter.
Let us know when the new one comes in.
So was there something else, Amy, that I had mentioned to you?
On your list?
Yeah.
Yeah, this plowing for the people that are gonna be
Oh.
here year-round.
The thing on the plowing for the year round, we had one person get back to us, they said they would plow that with a snow blower at $45 an hour.
Who was it? Who was it?
Basil.
Oh, Basil.
This was the property at the top of Auditorium Park that we've been talking about?
Yeah, to get down Northport Park. So I keep looking at it. I plowed it years ago, but we plowed it in a different direction. We now have a sander with sand, so maybe we can do it by driving down and back up around. It's not gonna be easy, but I assume that we're probably gonna get out of it cheaper if we
Yeah.
can.
If you find it's impossible for you to do that, to try, please experiment.
Yeah.
If it is the safety nightmare that you have hypothesized, then we'll have to talk to Basil again. But if you're willing to try it, I'd rather you do it in any event.
That was the decision at last month's meeting,
Well,
yes.
and I tried to figure out where this place was, so I acknowledge I'm not totally clear on where this place is, but there was talk about them parking at the top of the hill, and how about just snow plowing a path down to their house, or,
We can't get down through the cottages in the way. We have to go down the road.
What's on
Yeah,
the
it's
way?
still 45.
The only way to get there is in the road.
But there's a difference if we were asking Basil, for
Well,
instance, to
but they
plow a
can't.
path down versus plowing a car width down.
You might, but you'll have to get permission from the landowners to go across the property.
There's a public walkway.
Is there one down through there?
Yeah, pass
Beside
between
Larry-
Warren,
Used to be Larry Gibbs' cottage, the Ono cottage.
Yeah.
Right between his cottage and the deck is a public walkway.
So that deck that they got in the middle there?
Yeah.
That gazebo thing?
Yeah, they wanted to join that to the house, and the village said, no, there's a public walkway.
I
And
didn't
he,
know that.
rather than petition the village to move the walkway, he said, I'll move my deck out. So that's why his deck stands alone.
All right, yeah, that could be a thing. You're gonna have to want to sand it and salt it so they don't fall, because I believe she's pregnant.
So, do we need to make a motion here, or is this all set?
No, the motion at last month's meeting was to allow Bill to use his best judgment in this regard, and that he was going to try and use his equipment, and then we would take it from there. But
Right.
if we get to a storm and you can't handle it, I think you're authorized, obviously, to go to Basil right away or to figure that out on the spot.
Okay. All right. And I don't know how big his snow blower is, you know.
well, that's his problem, but
Well,
the
that's
other
our
is,
problem by the hour.
Yeah.
The bigger the snow plow, the bigger the snow blower, the less time it's gonna take.
well, exactly, but the other is, we're between a rock and a hard spot. And
Right.
so we're trying to satisfy something that is in our bylaws or whatever that was supposed to take care of this road. The other is, I would put these people on alert that we're gonna try to do our best. Again, communication's everything, rather than for them sitting there in the middle of a snowstorm saying, what's going on? And you're there trying to take care of everybody else as well as them, that we're
So
gonna try
I-
a couple things and see if it works.
I agree that some sort of communication to the renters, for all I know, they may be in there right now.
I'm not sure, right? think,
I think it's appropriate for us to let them know that this is our tactic, this is what we're gonna try to do. Is that the conversation you wanna have, Bill, or should it come from our overseers, or, but I think that the renters should know what our plan is, so that they don't expect necessarily that we are gonna be out there, we will be able to plow.
my feeling is, I think it should come off on an official letterhead that I can take there, probably, and give to them. Then if they had questions, I can answer it. And you also, on that, you need to put in there about the trash being taken up to the top.
Yeah, yeah.
Our guys won't be.
Should we consider the fact that they're gonna have to have somebody plow their driveway? Can we combine the two somehow?
That's their problem.
Yeah,
They may shovel it, you know.
They know their driveway's their problem.
That's their driveway's their problem, that's the old bird's problem, not ours.
Okay.
Because we don't plow public, private property.
And if we did,
Turn around in yours,
should that rule?
So, John, do you want that letter will you write that letter? Do you want me to write it?
Well, have theoretically more weight coming from the president. I just want to make sure I understand who the letter is going to, the owner, is it going to the renters?
Well, I think you should do both.
CC?
I think the old birds already know that we're
Yeah.
planning on doing something.
Colleen's sister,
Yeah.
yeah.
And they sent an email, I believe, gleefully telling us the name of the people they'd rented to or something
she
like
has-
that.
I forwarded it on to you.
So Amy, I may send you some sort of cover thing that you'll cut and paste and put back to them. But the language will essentially say that we'll make every best effort to plow access to the house from the main road. Should we be unable to, we'll attempt to do it using a snow blower through a public path. That they should work with us on this, and that they should certainly take their garbage up to the top of the street, which is where at the parking lot at the top there, Marathon, is that where they would take them to?
I believe that's probably, oh, well, this is something that I need to take the truck in to the Ford garage and have them fix the heater switches. Right now, they stay right on high. You can't
Sorry.
set in there without being in a sauna. So I need to take that, I don't know what the cost is gonna be.
Okay.
Okay. Before we move on to report the office manager, I want to echo Judy's comments earlier. Judy, as head of the communications committee, sent an email about a week or two back, but this is an instance, I think, where the work that the corporation employees, especially the village agent, perform is something that is not seen by a lot of people who are here during the summer. It's the above and beyond work that makes Bayside really functional and viable year after year. When you talk about running back and forth day and night, and we certainly appreciate that, Bill. And many of us are not here all the time, and so we don't get to see the damage done and the restoration of it. So thank you for everything you do, and of course that goes, again, yes, as indicated for Amy and for Dick and for Fernie. It's the stuff that we take for granted that makes this place possible, so thank you very much.
Yeah, well,
Which leads me to the office manager's report.
The only thing that I wanted to just remind you that it is the holiday season coming up, and where I work for the post office, during this time, especially in December, they like to have me deliver packages. So that may interfere with the office hours that are currently set up, but I will continue to post a notice on the door, letting people know that, you know, this is when I'm gonna be in, or these hours have been moved to a certain day. I do know this, the 24th of this month is one of the days that I am needed to work, which is a Friday, so that I am moving
Amy, could you
to.
speak up a little?
Whoops,
She's
sorry.
going to be working on Friday, the 24th of this month, Mike.
I'm not gonna be working.
Not working, well, working for the post office, not for us.
Yeah. So I'll be working here on the 23rd of this month instead of the 24th. So that's the only day for this month that is gonna be changing, but as
That
far
can't
as
be, that's Thanksgiving.
the 23rd?
Yes.
Well, yeah.
Oh, so I
It's a
will be
Thursday.
working.
I don't think
Yeah.
you'll work on Thanksgiving, won't make you do that.
So you'll work, make
So
it
I'll
up a different
probably
way.
work maybe that Tuesday then,
Okay.
so that I'll be able to
You're gonna
give
post
you
it.
guys hours. Yes.
She always posts.
Yeah, I put a notice always right on the door saying what day is being moved to what day, and usually it's the same hours.
Does Dan get that notice also?
Usually not, but I can,
I think it's a good idea, send it to Dan, can't hurt, so he can, just in case anybody's looking at his materials.
Right, I
Okay.
think that makes sense.
okay. Yeah, but that's the only thing that I just wanted to give you guys a heads up on to be aware of going forward for the next couple of months at least.
With our blessing.
That's it.
Any issues or questions for the office manager? So we'll move to committee reports, and we'll start with communications. Judy?
The utility department is going to be sending out a notice about the next billing because we're changing the cycles a little bit, period covered. So that will be going out shortly, and other than that, nothing to report.
Which leads me to ask a question of the treasurer. Now that we have moved our billing, we moved our billing up a month and a half actually, now that we're close to the end of the year, have the receipts followed appropriately, and did everybody march in line?
Well, we haven't changed it, so people are doing what they've been doing right along.
But we expected,
Are we talking general government? Are we talking-
General government.
general government, I'm sorry,
Generally,
Yeah,
yeah.
we're fine. So
People paid, you
people paid
noticed.
on, in general, people are paid very well. So that,
They got the message.
they got the message, and we sent out in advance, and I just want to make sure that,
Yep, I
because
understand.
talking about changing schedules, calendars made me think of that.
Yeah.
Finance committee, Judy?
The finance committee hasn't met, but it has individually reviewed the utility budgets that will be part of the utility conversation with no comments or criticisms.
And the governance committee?
Has not met, and that's all my fault.
Who is on the governance committee?
So far, Dick Brockway, Lee Houghton has said he will, depending on how I schedule it, and Blair Einstein.
Plus yourself.
And Tim, I've been told I shouldn't use diminutives, Tim Samway,
Total of 5.
right?
That's 4 more than when I was serving as communications chair, so.
Oh, no, now we talk about governance, you said.
I'm sorry, governance, I apologize, governance. I
Yeah,
was
it's
on-
about the same number. I want another person who has zoning expertise, but I haven't been able to corral anyone.
Okay. And again, the governance committee is going to be focusing on the fire ordinance, the zoning ordinance, and is that it?
That's it,
As far
unless
as
you
we
guys
know,
want
we
us
cover
to do
everything else
more.
off? Okay. Infrastructure, Mr. Lannon, Mike Lannon has sent around some notes regarding the infrastructure committee meeting that was held yesterday, I believe, Mike?
Yeah.
And so why don't you use those as your talking points?
Yeah, I was asking on Thursday, but close enough. So basically, we talked a lot about the election vote. I think we've beaten that one up already enough. We had originally talked about the three-phase program, but I think based on the conversations we had previously, we were discussing the money and Dick's points about, and Judy's points about making sure that we are up to whatever the MMA letter says. I would like to get a copy of that, and then we will sort of do the baseline on that together. I think it's going to be the most cost-effective way, and that will be presented to the board with the cost estimate in January or February, but latest, hopefully by January, because we really like to get that work done so it's up and running and safe by the next season. We also talked about the wharf again, a little bit about maintenance, and one of the issues there that's been brought up by Pinnacle is that we tend to do things a little reactively, and when there's issues with the wharf, we make modifications to the wharf and fix it, and we're looking at doing things a little bit more proactively, replacing bolts prior to them becoming fully loose, because when they do, they cause more damage, and we're looking at how can we reduce the amount of wear and tear prior to it really sort of loosening up. That has a lot to do with the bolts and also some of the issues with some of the actual synthetic pylons. So we're looking at those issues too, and we will have something coming up in the near future with that. We also discussed the seawall, and I went back through some of the stuff from 2016, and also went through some of the things that we had looked at with sort of a preliminary scope of work and other issues related to that. And I think I'd like to adjust the approach a little bit if we could. I'm thinking that, I guess this is where this comes from the overseers, is what do we really want to cost? I mean, I looked at the 2016 report, and there were A through H in options, where A was do nothing, and then all the rest were actually do something. So what is that? H is maybe 8 options, and I sort of narrowed it to 4, and I was wondering if that was something that we could consider, sort of narrowing that, or the scope of work to get cost estimates. I know in the report they recommended costing 2 options in the future, but given that we want to have this meeting where people provide some input, I don't think 2 is enough for everybody to sort of have an opportunity to consider all the options. So the way I sort of narrowed it down was, I don't think no option is one of the options, because if we do that, then we will be doing an emergency repair, and down the road, that would be way more costly. So we do want to do something. I think we've all agreed to that. So I eliminated that one. Obviously, the first option we need to look at is replacing kind, and that would be no visual changes. That would be the easiest to permit. We would have to address some of the drainage issues we have today. But given the 4 options that I think are remaining, that is the shortest time frame or life cycle would be that. So we talked about doing things on a life cycle cost basis, because we think that's really, we expect the wall to last a long time with whatever we pay. So we really are interested in sort of the shortest life cycle, obviously with aesthetics and everything else being considered. The second option was a granite wall, which would be somewhat of a replacement in kind, similar to what is now at the end of the causeway, as Billy pointed out. Obviously, that would have minimal visual changes. We would propose it to the Army Corps and Mass DEP and everyone as a replacement in kind, and we'd see how far that would take us. We would still have to address some of the drainage issues, but we clearly would get a lot longer life cycle out of the wall this way. The next one was looking at riprap with no wall. So that would obviously entail visual changes, and that would be something that everybody would have an opinion on, is what we sort of talked about. It would require lots of parking. We would have less drainage issues because it would just bring us down to the riprap. But whatever we would do for looking at life cycle costs with that, because we do know that there's a long life cycle, obviously, with riprap, but we would need to address the parking needs as part of that life cycle cost. So we have to do something else to replace parking, such as pull back the circle a little, or do some other things to address that loss of parking. We would want that included in the cost estimate so that everything is being compared on an apples-to-apples basis. And then the last one is sort of a hybrid. It's the half-wall riprap combo. Obviously, there will be some visual changes. We would have some loss of parking. It may provide better access to the waterfront, and I think one of the things that has been brought up to me is that the beach on that side is less usable, I think, because people feel like they're down in a little bit of a hole. They don't like to go there as much. And with something like this, it might be a little bit more accessible. for folks. We would have to address the drainage issues relative to that, and obviously the loss of parking would also need to be considered. And we feel that that would be in the middle of life cycle, because obviously whatever we'd be doing with the wall would still need to be done, but we would have quite a bit of buffer by riprap that would reduce alarm before it would win in the long run before it hit that wall. I would envision it would be, if we were to do that, it would be some sort of granite wall, but again, that's up to debate. So, my preference is that as a group here, the Board of Overseers, we adopt these 4 options to move forward with, because I think the other options that were presented in it, some of them were precast concrete, some of them were concrete blocks. I cannot believe that the aesthetics of those would be acceptable to most people, and I also question some of the longevity of concrete that really is not designed for a marine application. So that would be my suggestion on that. I'd open that up for some questions and comments at this time.
Silence around the table, Mike. That's a very comprehensive approach, and I appreciate your detailing it for us. And you answered my first question, which was going to be which are the ones that we're leaving out of this. Are the recommendations that you're making coming from the committee or from your assessment?
It's from our discussion, and then I summarize it into these 4. So these are mine from the meeting today, going over what we had talked about, and it was important that we were addressing the things such as drainage and parking and so on. So I took all the comments from the meeting and then summarized it in these 4. So these 4 are not a recommendation from the committee directly, other than we did talk about 2 not being enough options, and there were too many in the original scope to move forward because we spent way too much money on costing conceptual options.
Thank you. Paul?
Something that's since occurred to me since the committee meeting is riprap would be the least expensive, probably sustain the most weather, and the only offset to that is the loss of parking. If we can contain the riprap inside the current circle area, so we don't intrude on the circle, on the paved area, it might be viable to pick up some parking, maybe as much as all of it. There'd be 11 spaces is what I counted, with using the circle, the green area of the circle for parking. I don't know how people feel about that, or whether it would deal with traffic flow properly, but I think people tend to park over on the opposite side. So if we go into that area, we'll be losing some of that parking. So just thought I'd throw that out to see what people think about using the circle turnaround, the green area, for parking purposes.
Vicki?
I think reducing it down to 4 selections and then, go maybe down to 2 is a good idea. And what I hear from what you said was, there are options where we lose parking and options where we don't lose parking. So the issue is, do we want to lose parking down there? And if we lose parking, do we have options? And do we need options if we lose parking? So I see parking as a major point in deciding which might be best. My guess is they're all about the same cost.
Mike, I was hearing 4 key factors along the way: longevity, drainage, aesthetics, and parking. There may...
And I think you can throw a 5th in there, which is permanent.
Permitting, okay? Permitting, longevity, aesthetics, parking, and drainage.
Well, I think you've got initial cost.
And initial costs as an aspect to this,
So
so
that's a permitting?
permitting.
This is why it's important that Mike was using the language that we'll want to characterize it as a replacement.
Correct.
Okay.
When he talked about the granite which would be a difference that we would go as far as we could go with the Army Corps to argue to them that it is simply a replacement. And he said, we'll see how far we can go with that. Because if we are altering what we have, then we will have a 2 or 3 year, at the very least, and very expensive permitting process just to get through there.
Right, I mean, obviously, we know we have time to, because the report says, with the disclaimer that if we have a bad storm, something can happen, but we have probably a minimum of 5 years left in life in this. So we do have time, but you're right, the cost of permitting is part of this conceptual cost.
So is the board comfortable with the direction that the infrastructure committee is proposing, which is proceeding with 4 options to present, to explore, and ultimately present to the voters?
Well, back when I was a kid, and the infrastructure decided that the no wall and the half wall were not viable decisions because it was violating the parking spaces and that type of thing. And so that's where the 2 issues came up, the resolution of 2. Now, if you want to go back and say, well, maybe the no wall or the riprap design is good, and maybe the half wall. Think of the half wall is exactly what the side of the causeway looks like. Okay, it's got granite wall and then riprap, and that's what you would have for the center.
Ron, can you speak up a little bit?
Well, I'm about finished, Mike, so,
Okay.
my feeling is that I think it's premature to go into a great deal of detail at this point. I think the infrastructure committee ought to carry on with the professional engineer to try to get some of the prices. I'm afraid the granite wall is probably, from a procurement point of view, the most expensive, probably the most desirable. It's kind of the gold standard. The other options, I'd say carry on the way it's going. It looks good to me.
Yeah,
Right, I think you're right, I think, Brock, I think the only way we want to consider some of the ones with the loss of parking is we have to have some sort of an alternative, which is potentially pulling the circle back a little, or redoing the drainage between Park Road and the park so that we can park in over there. It has to be some sort of replacement, because we all agree that we're already restricted on parking, and we wouldn't want to consider these without another option, and those options cost money.
Yeah.
Lee?
Historically, if you see old pictures that were taken 100 years ago, they had kind of like riprap.
Yep.
And you still lost a lot of ground. Down here, there used to be a carriage trail that went beyond the first cottage.
Right.
And there's no room for a carriage trail anymore. So I didn't speak up very loudly during the infrastructure committee meeting.
Okay.
But I didn't speak up very loudly in my
expression of point of view.
yeah, I definitely am against this riprap thing. I think you're going to lose a lot more ground than you foresee. The drainage problems that we have now, all we're going to do is move them further back up the hill. We're going to lose parking, and whether you like it or not, riprap is not a permanent solution. If you have a big storm, the waves are going to come up further. It'll break some of the initial force, but you're going to lose ground. It's just a fact of life.
So I think that we don't want a riprap only option, is that what we're getting at?
That's my opinion.
I think it's premature to go in and debate the various designs. I think of the 4 or 5 members of the infrastructure committee, there are probably 4 or 5 first choices. And I think we need to decide which ones we want to pursue with vengeance, determine the cost, the acquisition cost, the life cycle cost, those types of things, determine the other applications, parking, whatever, and carry on. And that is basically, the purpose of the first half of 2018 is to really decide what we're going to present to the voters. I do not want this to be a public vote type of thing. I'd like to go to the annual meeting with a solution guided by the people, not having the people vote it at that time. Because you give them 5 votes, you get an awful mess.
Right, which is why I would prefer that we not take any of the options off the table right now, except perhaps the 2 that Dick and Lee have both indicated are really non-starters, and present all of them to our consulting engineer, so that our consulting engineer can develop that grid in terms of the permitting, the material costs, the lifespan, and the aesthetics. So when we go to the villagers, we have credibility behind us, and we're not just saying, well, this is Mike's idea, or this is Dick's idea, or this is Lee's idea. We're saying all of these ideas were evaluated, and this is the one that rose to the top.
That sounds great. What is the budget for the conceptual design?
$15,000.
How much?
15.
Okay.
And Paul had his.
Paul, sorry.
The only thing further I want to mention is that Lee thinks there's a source of granite that we might be able to acquire economically. Huh?
You're on tape.
Well,
That one, right?
That's all right. That's all right.
Every overseer should hear what was said. The suggestion was that there might be a source of granite at Griffin and George Streets.
Oh, okay, yeah. That is fine.
that's not exactly what I had in mind.
That's what the numbers we had in mind.
I apologize.
Explore
Go
that
ahead.
possibility. That's all I wanted to mention.
No, so all these details aren't to be worked out. That's why we're dealing with a professional engineer. I think you're getting the direction you need, which is an approval and an okay to move forward with your 4 options.
No, I think Judy was suggesting more. With a 15K budget, though, I would like to trim off a couple. So what are the ones that you're talking about trimming off, Steve?
Well, I think Dick identified the ones that, say it again, Dick, the half wall and the no wall and the riprap. The
The
half-
riprap and the half wall.
I don't think we should discount anything yet.
Okay.
So we're taking off any riprap option.
I
No.
wouldn't.
Paul wouldn't, so Paul wants you to keep them all on.
Okay, so again, like you said, five Indians and 5 options.
Yep.
So we'll keep going. All right. I just, okay, we're gonna keep them all except for the no option.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What else?
One more thing there, and then, let's see, where were we?
The dinghies.
Oh, the dinghy, yes, we had a discussion about the dinghies. This is an ongoing issue, as we all know, and what we want to do to address it. We spent a good half an hour kicking around a lot of different ideas, and everything from expanding the float, how we would do that, to limiting the dinghies on the float with some sort of new rules, maybe a lottery system or something to that effect, to arranging a launch service that would be likely partially funded by the village corp and partially funded by these people who used it, and then to simply enforcing some of the existing rules, which is definitely part of the issue today. There are plenty of times there are dinghies down there full of water that haven't moved in days, 2 weeks, and the real concern is that they are putting a stress on the floats, and the float that puts a moment on the wharf during storms, and, although it's secured by its own anchors, it does still pull on the wharf, and we're worried about the long-term viability of the boats. The dinghies seem to keep getting more involved, and we just don't have enough space. So the Warren Field has continued to grow, expanded all the way down to our house now, pretty much on when we first put it on Warren's in front of Shore Road, there was a space between the Warren Field and our that there's more of a demand. So we just need to think about that also long-term. And so I'd like to open that up for some discussion.
My opinion, for what it's worth, is that the number of dinghies is an infrastructure issue because of the loading on the wharf. The method of controlling the number of dinghies is a wharf master issue. Just for what it's worth.
Well, I don't understand the difference because to me, the number of dinghies is mostly being driven by the number of moorings. So not necessarily, we have limited dinghies, so we have more moorings.
We should basically set up a rule, village rule, that there are no more than 15 dinghies attached to the wharf, or whatever number you want. And let the wharf master figure out how he does it. Does he do it by a lottery? Does he have a launch? Whatever. But I don't think the overseers and infrastructure committee ought to get into the dinghy issue.
Well,
Protection of the wharf is important. The dinghy issue is a supplement to that.
Judy?
I agree somewhat with Dick, but I do think the overseers have a role in terms of supporting the wharf master and echoing his efforts and enforcing his efforts. We have rules. We have rules on the length of the dinghies, the length of time the dinghies can be there, neither of which are enforced. You're right, the mooring field has been expanded, but the people who have the dinghies there aren't there Monday through Friday. So their dinghy shouldn't be there Monday through Friday. We have rules about motors on dinghies not being on the wharf, and yet there are motors on dinghies. So what we need to do is let the wharf master know that he's not alone in this exercise and figure out a way to enforce these rules if need be. Steve, I think I remember that it was you some time ago who explored one way to approach this in terms of user fees, and how that works and how that doesn't work. And I know that emotionally I'm in support of user fees on that particular rule, but we didn't go down that path when you did all that work.
Right.
So Mike, I've spent a ton of time on this with Gordon.
Okay,
And
great.
what I can tell you without question is that enforcement can't fall to the wharf master.
Right.
Did you hear that okay?
Yeah, so I do have a question though, relative to the wharf and access. Obviously, we are in the town of Northport, even though we're in the village of Bayside. What do we have to provide for access to town people to that dinghy dock? And can we enforce things on town residents and the village?
It's a public wharf available to all without restriction except subject to the rules such as the dinghy tie-up and the fishing rules that we've imposed.
You could conceivably make it a resident or taxpayer in the town of Northport only dinghy access. So you would exclude anyone who was in the mooring field who did not own property in Bayside. But that's going to eliminate very few of the dinghies. And frankly, if you look around, very few of the dinghies on the dock today meet the standard.
Right.
So most of the inflatables are too big.
Right.
So it's
So it would be 10 feet or less, correct?
I'm sorry?
10 feet or less.
I'm pretty sure that's where it is.
Vicki?
So the issue here is enforcement, which is not going to change unless we get a separate enforcement individual. What happens if we just say nobody leaves their dinghy on the dock? Because what are they going to, if they're not supposed to be there, they're supposed to be someplace else. So other than picking up and dropping off, no dinghies on the dock, and then any dinghy that's on the dock gets taken off, just like if you park in the wrong spot. Is there, I mean, it changes the whole culture down there, but the culture down there is being terribly abused, and this is the second time I've had a conversation on this.
Well, maybe,
Culture is what, I'm sorry?
Being terribly abused.
right, so maybe to give Gordon the support he needs, maybe one thing the governance committee should be looking at is not just the carrot of the right to follow, to store things there, but the stick when you don't follow. Maybe we need those waterfront regulations to be transformed into a ordinance which has a stick associated with it, and not Gordon pulling the dinghies off, but our police officer pulling the dinghies off.
Lee?
This goes back to instituting
Speak up, please.
this goes back to instituting a dinghy fee. If you do anything to infraction the rules that we've set aside for dinghies, then you lose your rights to have a dinghy fee, or your right to have a dinghy on the dock the following year. If-
Take 10% of your dinghy.
Well, I think it goes back to the wharf master maybe coming up with something that he thinks will work for him, because you still have somebody down there checking to who's got a dinghy tag or not. And I guess we couldn't compare this to the dog waste issue. Is it enforceable, and how? I think there's a way to enforce this, and I appreciate and empathize with Gordon's plot, you know.
Well, I think that one way to help move the dialogue forward is we do this conversation once every 3 months when we get frustrated with it, or we hear Gordon frustrated with it. We need to sit down, I think, with appointed members of the yacht club, the Commodore, and say, your membership is causing these issues. What's your key to what would you recommend the solution be? And if they're part of that conversation, that's one way to
But
to
the
find
customer
solution.
insurance is Jim, right?
Right.
Correct.
Right, so he's a Bayside resident. So maybe we should establish a subcommittee to the infrastructure committee, and it would be Jim and Gordon and Steve. You said you had some conversation. Lee and Judy, because of the governance aspect of it, and myself.
I think that's premature.
I don't see it as an infrastructure conversation, except to the extent that it puts pressure on the float, which Billy and you already addressed in the context of the annual report. I think you're pushing us to exactly where we should be, which is, we've done this conversation many times without the yacht club here. I think the yacht club Commodore needs to be at it, but I think it's appropriately in a governance on a standalone or a different committee, but I wouldn't want to add to your plate.
Okay, great. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. We'll explore some of the governance things, and if we can't do it that way, and we end up having to add infrastructure, then it would come back. So first, we're going to try it via rules, regs, fines, fees, whatever. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's what we are saying around the table.
1 second, Vicki?
But the infrastructure part is the number of dinghies that you would like to see, the maximum number on the dock at any one time. That's the infrastructure piece. How that's going to be
Or
managed
changing the size.
goes back to the yacht club to get their members in line.
Well, I think the point is that if the present regulations are enforced, there probably is much less, if none at all, dinghy problem.
Right.
Now, if there needs to be a change in the infrastructure to accommodate whatever issues come up, then that certainly is an issue that needs to be taken in the future. But-
Right, I think there's a short-term governance issue, there's a long-term issue with adding more warrants, but we can address that at another time.
Yep.
So, am I hearing that the governance committee will take on, for the short term, this issue as a responsibility, and that the first point of order seems to be to establish contact with Jim and the yacht club, and to initiate this conversation with them?
Yeah, and that's fairly
And
easy.
Gordon,
Yeah, and Jim and Gordon are easy for me to get to the dinner table.
So it sounds like, for the moment, it sounds like, Mike, this is being taken, as it was said, off your plate in terms of infrastructure.
sounds great. And it'll go through the governance, because the first thing is they come up with rules and regs.
Thank you.
We've got.
We're important what it is.
Yeah, it's good you raised it, I think.
Anything else from the infrastructure committee?
No, that's it for today. Thank you.
Hey, Mike, I have one thing for you, or two things for you.
Yes, sir.
You're talking about preventative maintenance on the wharf.
Yes.
So we've never budgeted that way. I think it's the right thing to do, but we have a very limited contingency fund next year once we use the funds that are in there for the consulting engineer. It's gonna be a question of choices for the overseers to make if they wanna make that additional investment next year, or if we wanna budget for the following year.
I think if you do is just to get a handle on what would the cost be to come up with a preventative program.
Yep.
And then it's something that, you know, if it's preventative, we don't even have to start it next year.
Yeah,
Whatever.
and I think it's the absolute right thing to do. The second piece is, it would be wonderful if the infrastructure committee would put together a recommendation or process to annually inspect the wharf early in the year and repair it immediately following Labor Day. What we've done for the last several years is made this a labor of love and debate it and go back and forth, and it seems like it's something we just ought to be doing. We plow the roads when it snows. We need to do the maintenance on the wharf. We shouldn't be discussing this every year.
I think Billy's saying, yeah, Billy, I think.
Bill's nodding his head. I don't know if you're nodding your head, Mike.
Yes.
Good, that's all I had. Thank you.
Any other issues for the infrastructure committee? Seeing none, we'll move on to the safety committee. Wendy Hutton is not here. Is there any other member of the safety committee here? She did send out an email regarding the topics that came up at their safety committee meeting. They appointed Mike Terrell to the safety committee. An update on the storm damage, and she said, I'm sure that Amy and Bill are planning on addressing this in their individual reports. It might be worth a more general discussion, particularly as it relates to activities and costs for the Northport Village Corporation, such as tree removal. I'm not exactly sure what she's referring to there. In terms of the safety committee, Bill, do you feel that there's another discussion that needs to happen in terms of costs or concerns?
I didn't quite understand what you just said.
I didn't either, and I read it out verbatim.
I think she was talking about trees falling down, and if that was a safety issue that should be further discussed, and I think we've discussed it.
I think so. Her final point is that the safety committee recommended having a safety fair in the summer season to bring people and organizations together that provide safety services to the village. Wouldn't need much funding, just support and ideas. Villagers, who are especially those who are new to the village, might need to understand how Bayside depends on Northport and Waldo County for many of its safety services. Might be an opportunity for NVC committees to provide information. I assume this is something the safety committee will continue to discuss. Not a bad idea. So especially I like the notion that people who are new here in June or July might learn who provides what in terms of safety and other issues here. And there is a question raised by Mr. Lightner. Yes, sir.
Okay, well, I just want to say that the thing about this town is that there's a lot of people that breeze in for 1 week, that don't know, and so if you have a fair, that's one thing, but if I made like a 5-minute video, by the way, I'm not talking about charging you, but if I volunteered to help in making a video that could be on the website, that could be shared with people, that may have a longer, be able to reach more people. So I'm not a member of the safety committee, though I have some experience there, and I would like to say that I'd be willing to work with them on developing a video that, it's not going to be that complicated, but they could kind of explain to renters or whoever the information. I just wanted to bring that forward.
That's
Really
wonderful,
smart
Ned,
idea.
and I'm certain I speak for the overseers in saying we appreciate any help you would provide, and if you could get in touch with Wendy in terms of how that could be brought about, I agree with you. Any fair, as wonderful as it is, would only hit the people who are here.
All right. I'd be happy to help with that. Maybe the fair could happen and I could work a bit, and I could make that video at that time, so that it would have longer legs, as they say.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Vicki?
And I would just add that in a format or whatever that could maybe be shared with the rental companies and people who
Right.
rent in their packet of information that they send people.
It can, what I would likely do is put it up on YouTube, and then that link can be shared by email or whatever. It's a very, they make it so easy these days to make that happen.
And the website, Dan's website also. Thank you. Tamara, yes?
I thought Wendy was seeking your official appointment of Mr. Terrell.
Well, sorry, 1 second.
I mean, if you didn't read it that way, that's fine, I just didn't want to have it drop off.
She did say, I think he would be an excellent addition. She didn't indicate whether,
So maybe we just direct you to appoint him to the Social Safety Committee.
I will, and do I have that direction from the
I
overseers?
move that we
Move that we
It's a motion that,
appoint Mr. Terrell, direct the president to appoint Mr. Terrell to the Safety Committee,
Sure.
consistent with recommendations.
Seconded by Dick.
thank you,
I don't know if you need to, but
I don't
that's
know.
what like she was looking for.
thank you. Town liaison, Paul?
Bill's already gone over much of what was discussed by the selectmen, namely Malone, and the issues there. But additionally, there was some concern by the selectmen that we gave Malone and Mary Hanrahan a piece of village property to clear their title and so forth. And the concern was that it wasn't voted on by the body of the village. I really don't have a legal explanation. All I could say was that we had to defer to Judy Metcalf, our legal beagle. So I don't know if that requires explanation to the selectmen. I'd be glad to convey that.
I'd be happy to put together a note as to when we don't need the approval of the village and when we do. In both the instances of the Malone, Cressy, Brockway, Hanrahan, all of those were in the context of confirmatory grants, as opposed to the other example I would give you is the decision to purchase property, which has to go to the villagers. So in each of those times, just like in a municipal quitclaim deed, when taxes are matured, and so then the municipality or the village owns the property, and so the village, we have frequently as overseers signed municipal quitclaim deeds back over to the taxpayer once they paid the bills. We don't need to wait until the annual meeting for that. So the difference between the two things is, are you confirming a state of affairs, or are you entering into a different state of affairs?
So do you want to compose something like that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do some.
I guess I'm confused as to Paul's question. Was he saying that the town is concerned that the town didn't get involved in that, or the town is concerned that the village residents didn't get?
Correct, the second choice.
Okay, so they're concerned that the residents were.
Right.
Yeah, they're expressing concern on behalf of the residents essentially who live here, who have the right to participate in the annual meeting. That's how I hear it.
Right.
Thank you.
And mainly because when we acquire property, we have to go through that process.
Hi, John?
Yes,
Yeah, this is Mike. I need to sign out here.
okay, thank you for your participation, we appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.
Okay, so we'll get something to them, or
Yeah, I'll write a letter to Barbara if that's okay.
it would be good for our records too to know the distinction. The other things are more germane to the town that were discussed. But since I've had a couple of things come my way, one of which was a complaint by Priscilla Granston. She says that after the storm, the people next door, the Grays, had a tree come down on their embankment that fell into the bay. and they cut up the tree, but they let it float off. And it's a substantial tree trunk, and it's hitting into other people's property with the tide. As the tide changes, current changes, it lands on other people's retaining walls and stairs and stuff like that. So she wasn't sure who to address that to, although she intends to have her son, David, contact the harbor master to see if he can do anything about it. So I don't know what to advise her, except that's probably the right course of action. Do we have a procedure for that?
The harbor master would have been the one I thought of, or John Larson, who enforces the shoreline zone ordinance, to see if the tree was properly disposed of.
All right, I'll mention it to John. And I think that's about all I got. Oh, there was one complaint that came my way regarding dog attacks. There's a dog on Main Street, a summer resident, whose dog has attacked 2 or 3 times other dogs. And I don't know if we're aware of that or not, but
That went out to all of the overseers, I believe.
That was very old news, my understanding is that as a consequence of the dog attacks, 2 that occurred this summer, 1 quite serious, the dog has been crated, and the dog has gone through a very aggressive, assertive training, and living within echoes of those dog barks and that drama. I can say that the second half of the summer, it was a totally different world than what we all lived through for the first half of the summer.
so the issue's been addressed?
My, not only that it was addressed, but that I who's scared of dogs, think it was largely resolved. There was not the drama that we had at the beginning of the year.
Okay, I'll pass that on.
If other people feel as though that, that something else has happened, now the house, they're not there, the people. But for instance, Bob and Suki live right across the street from there, and they were nervous about that dog, but they were pleased. I heard that they were pleased at the way the behavior of the dog had totally changed.
Okay, good. Other than that, I don't have anything else.
For the record, I live on a street that also has a dog that has been involved in issues, and my experience has been that when dog owners are apprised of what's going on, when they learn, that they seem to be very quick to address the situation. I think that we live in a community where nobody wants anybody else in danger in that regard.
Well, the town does have an animal control officer.
Right, and everyone's
It's the
aware of
first
that.
place to go.
Right.
Right.
Paul, I want to thank you very much for keeping us so closely linked with what's going on in town in terms of issues. I really appreciate
That's
it.
why I get paid the big bucks.
That's why I get paid the big bucks, all of us do. Next is tree planting, and I'm going to hold off on that until the report of the tree warden. I think the two are sort of tied together. There was an email that John Woolsey sent out, but I'll address that then. Utility committee?
Utility committee has 2 action items for you. We told you last October that we had gone through the first draft of our draft budget with the good work of Steve Caslionis and the bookkeepers who do a good job of keeping things in order, and Dick McElhaney. We went through a first draft. We made recommended changes. The changes have all been incorporated in the 2 documents that have just been handed to you. I apologize that they didn't have labels. One has a handwritten label that says water, and the other, the one that doesn't have a label, by default is sewer.
What's left, right.
These are the drafts that have been sent out to all of you in October and meticulously gone over by the Utilities Committee. Tweaks were made, not just tweaks, some substantial changes were made as a result of the October meetings. They were all incorporated, and we are looking for, with the recommendation of the Utilities Trustees, approval of the sewer budget and the water budgets for 2018. These include the compensation adjustments that the overseers incorporated last year, so that last month, so that we have those changes in here. There are changes in here as advised by Steve and by the Dick McElhaney. We are trying, with the good advice of Steve, to get closer and closer to concrete numbers and not front end as much into contingencies, and yet we have addressed contingencies as well, because we know things can always happen. So I would make a motion that the 2018 water budget be approved as recommended by the majority of the utilities trust, by all the utilities trustees, and then I'll make one as to sewer.
This is coming into the finance committee, Debbie?
No, this comes into utility trustees.
Utilities trustee.
The finance committee did receive these last drafts, or they were circulated at the end of end of last week. So they could look at them again. They were directed to look for mistakes, not to opine at that point. And no commentary or mistakes were noticed or were sent our way.
Is there a second on the motion to approve the water budget 2018?
I'll second.
That's Dick. Any discussion?
Yeah, just a couple questions. I haven't had a chance to look at these at all, because they just arrived, and I apologize. I do have one question. Based upon the information in front of me, it looks like the sewer fund has $314 worth of excess revenue. So in other words, you're spending every penny you take in.
Essentially, yeah.
That's inconsistent with what I had seen before, and I'm not gonna challenge it because I haven't looked at it.
I think because we uploaded some other specific line items for, to get the money out of contingencies, and we put it into the particular accounts. Plus, we absorbed our portions of the raises that were granted raise. So they're put in here as well.
Just an observation. If that's where you are, I think you need to be looking at rate increase.
For sewer?
We're right now talking about the water. Judy was presenting this as two motions.
Right.
So right now we're on water, and I'd rather deal with water first.
That's okay, it's still a fair question.
Do your questions apply to the water budget also?
I have not reviewed either. I just looked at them quickly. There's contingency funds in water that are certainly better than they've been in the past, which have been zero. So,
Right. So on the water side, are there issues? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the 2018 water budget? Oh, sorry.
If Steve hasn't seen this, I think we should defer, can we defer this?
No, we
I
really
don't
can't.
think you need to. You know, I provided extensive input, and I read one line wrong. The sewer has extensive contingency, which is true, I'm sorry. No, I provided Dick with some extensive recommendations, and based upon what I now see for contingency funds, they have incorporated those. What they've basically done is taken what I'll call monies that may have appeared in a line item, just in case, and budgeted what they know they need and put the remainder in contingency. It doesn't prevent them from going and using that money on that same purpose, but to budget, say, $5,000 for repairs, when your history is $1,000 a year, you know, you'll have that $5,000 a year, and you need the money, but it's in contingency, it's much the same as what we do in general government.
Just want to be very careful before we increase
Yeah, it
rates.
yeah, no, I understand that. That was a misstatement on my part.
All right.
And to review the process, we put together our first draft in September, did a line item review in October with Steve's, before he went to Germany, his very careful thoughts and recommendations as to where we should go. We took some of his ideas and not some of his ideas and split the baby on some other ideas. That's what we put together in October, but we directed Dick to make those changes and to, because we knew that the overseers would be talking about compensation, to hold it until the compensation decisions were made. The compensation decisions were made in October. They were put in here. We made sure that all the things we voted on in October were incorporated as we directed, consistent with Steve's recommendations when we accepted his recommendations. We didn't take everything he said. And then this is that final budget. It would be great to get this approved today, because as Steve has counseled us, in the past, we often haven't approved these until we're into January. And we'd love to start 2018 with the budget in place.
So Steve, are you comfortable with the overseers voting on this document?
I don't see why not. I mean, I would like to think the utilities trustees put the time and effort into it to look at it. It's ultimately their responsibility.
Further discussion on this? Seeing none, may I have a vote on the 2018 water budget, please? All in favor? That's unanimous. Sewer budget, madam.
I make the motion that the 2018 sewer budget as presented in this document be approved for 2018 with the recommendation it advice a majority of all of the utilities trustees.
Any discussion?
Second.
Second by Lee. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That's unanimous. Anything else from the Utilities Committee?
No.
Congratulations on starting the new year with approved budgets. Our final report is from the tree warden. As I indicated earlier, there's some issues regarding that, so I'm going to do a tiny bit of history here, just to bring everyone up to speed, including those who are watching this on video, which is that historically, of course, Bayside had a tree warden, Jane Phillips. When she passed away, that position, with her encouragement prior, moved on to Jane Strauss. A few months ago, there was a feeling that perhaps the overseers needed a committee to address specifically long-term planning of the public green infrastructure, and such a committee was organized now to bring us more currently up to speed. On October 18th, John Woolsey sent around an email saying that he had a meeting here. I believe it was just Vicki and John who were able to attend. Jane Strauss was not able to be there. He says it didn't seem like the time to do anything substantive, and so his feeling was that in terms of doing an audit of a catalog of all the trees, that could wait until 2018, and he suggests that that committee meet officially first in June of 2018. He had had a conversation with someone at University of Maine Orono who said that there's online catalogs available, so that there's software that we could access. We would not be creating this from scratch. Subsequent to that conversation and email, on November 9th, I received an email from Jane Strauss. I think it's appropriate to read it in full. I'll be out of town this weekend and unable to attend the meeting. I will also be resigning as tree warden. The village is obviously going in a new direction regarding trees, and the tree warden position is now focused primarily on meeting with unhappy cottage owners, which is not something I feel is a particular fit with my skills. I hope to be able to serve the community in other ways in the future. Thanks for your support to date, Jane Strauss. So, we have a tree planning committee, and I understand that not everybody is willing to be on this committee, but at least on paper, it consists of John Woolsey, John Spritz, Bill Page, Mike Lennon, Vicki Matthews, Blair, Beanie Einstein, and Jane Strauss. That at the moment is the only body that is responsible for trees. There are a few issues regarding trees in the village. One is the replacement of trees which have come down. Most recently, I counted 5, Bill, in your list. There may be more for all we know in terms of public trees that need to be replaced. There's also this talked about audit of all of the public trees so we have a better sense of their condition, replacement needs, etc. There's also the general interactions with landscaping companies who come to do work for us, and that has traditionally been something that the tree warden has done in concert, and as well as Bill. So I guess the overseers need to determine how we best move forward in this regard.
Well, I think that's a disappointment. I would say that one of the talents that Jane Phillips brought to this job is recognizing that this was a job that was built on communications with cottage owners, happy or otherwise. And it's unfortunate that Jane Strauss did not have maybe an appreciation of that, or once she got involved in that part of the already defined job, she felt uncomfortable. I appreciate Jane recognizing that she doesn't feel comfortable, and so giving us the latitude to step aside. As a practical matter, Bill is boots on the ground. Bill deals with these people. Jane Phillips always had Bill's back, and Billy always had her back. I think I would want the committee to evaluate what they think the forward path is. I think that's the charge we basically had given them. Mindful that Billy will not let the tree maintenance and tree replacement conversation fall by the wayside in the meantime. So for instance, Banners was supposed to be here in the next, we should have been getting a report from Jane that Banners was here doing their annual assessment. I would hope that would still be scheduled.
As far as I know, it's still scheduled. I think the holdup now is just overwhelmed.
Yeah, no, but no tree person
Do
can.
you know when it's scheduled for?
They can't tell me. They don't know.
Yeah.
They're just overwhelmed with work.
And this is an annual tree assessment that
They usually do a spring and a fall assessment. And they did the spring, which is how you develop your workload for your projected work for 2017. And they invariably come in the fall to see if all the work's been done and what the new work should be during the winter. I think your board's schedule is probably that we're on the list, and of course the list changed dramatically as of October 29th for every tree person in the state. So I'm comfortable waiting for the report of the committee as to what they think they should do, as long as Bill knows that he should still do that work.
Okay, so the tree planting committee was my suggestion initially, so I will take responsibility here. It wasn't so much that I wanted to be on the committee, but I see a need because I don't know where some of these conversations take place, but it just seemed like there was lots of money, potential money to be spent on trees. And then, you know, we had the emergency where the limbs fell off and all of that other stuff. And so I think I would feel more comfortable in this community where we value our trees so much with, you know, with something that has a plan, has a budget, that can, again, be passed down as leadership changes and things like that. So that was my idea of the tree planning committee. As far as the tree warden, that was probably the beginnings of a tree planning committee. I don't know how long I've been a tree warden. I don't know all of that history. And I think when John Woolsey left, we were talking about trees, and the idea of a tree planning committee came from his suggestion that maybe it would take a few more people to make an orderly process of the trees where everybody's questions could be answered and complaints listened to and whatever needs taken care of. A couple things, it was just John and I, but somebody at the University of Maine has some sort of student program where they will come in and put everything in a grid. My computer skills are not great. My suggestion was, let's do it now. Why wait? They're in school. I mean, let's get these things lined up or whatever. But since it was just the two of us, we didn't make any decisions. So I don't know where everybody feels we should go from here with the trees. We're in a bit of a tree mess right now. I would be more than happy to be with Bill and the vendors when they come and be that liaison. If you need an overseer person who's a committee chairman, I would be willing to take that on, although I said before I didn't want it. Okay, but I would like to see this, you know, take shape and make some progress, so we're not discussing it this year, next year, this.
You want to be the tree warden?
I'm not going to be the tree warden. I will put a planning committee together and get us our feet on the ground. That's necessary.
I think if you have a contact number at the UMO,
You have a name.
University of Maine, that would be great to get it underway. We have benefited from the engineering students every time they come down. I know they benefit from having access to us. When I founded the Bath Community Forestry Committee 27 years ago, but that was one of the first things we did, was have the UMO kids come in and do the grid for us, and it's great. So if you wanted to get that underway, I think that'd be super. I was trying to give you guys space, because it is a big thing.
Well, I thought, yeah, let's go, yeah, okay. I mean,
So the language from John's email says, she, Tishkar, UMO, also suggests that one of their senior students could do their capstone project with Bayside, say there are some resources available to us. I think basically we should contact Tishkar and say, start it happening. I don't know if there are any expenses required at our end at all, or if it's merely a matter that they come down and do their magic.
Okay,
But you should,
let's get it going, okay. So I'm hearing, let's get it going. Do
Let's
you need
get
an overseer as a chairman of this committee?
every committee requires an overseer to be chair. I also note that of the people who are listed as being on this committee, except for Blair and Vinnie Einstein, I believe that's Blair actually, there's no one from the community who's not, and I suspect that in this situation, there might be several gifted members of the Bayside community who might want to serve. So once you sort of figure out what you want this committee to be doing, get in touch with us. It might be we want to put a message out through Dan to people saying that there's a committee called this, and we're looking for people who are passionate about trees. And it might be that our next tree warden is amongst us, and we just don't know who it is. We will have a next tree warden. It's not a position that shall go unfilled. I think it's a critical role.
It's a bylaws position.
It's a bylaws position as
We
well
don't
as
want
being
to change
critical.
bylaws.
Right. It's, I think, the very last item of the bylaws, as I recall, it's like paragraph 205. But we will have a tree warden in it. And as I say, it may well be that someone who's here who, once they're aware of what the position entails, and they have the right passion for fill that role.
So explain to me the reasoning behind having a tree warden if you have a tree planting committee.
The original understanding of the committee, when it was rooted about several months ago, was that it would be in support of the tree warden. The tree warden's role is the person who is on top of the condition of the trees in the village. And they are interacting through Billy, with people, residents who have issues. They're the ones who are having those discussions. Ideally, they'd be having regular discussions more than twice a year with the landscaping company. They're the ones who care about trees as a person, or bringing issues to the overseers. The committee was meant to be in support of that person, and the committee especially was going to be working initially on this audit. It may be that the committee does not need to exist in perpetuity. It may be that if we find the right tree warden, that the committee can say, that person is doing their job, and this committee doesn't need to exist. I don't know, but it was meant initially to be a support structure.
Okay.
That was the understanding when we were talking about why should we create this committee at all.
So if we put the words ad hoc,
My thought was we were
Ad
a
hoc.
tree warden and make it a commit, my thought was, okay, my individual take was that eventually the tree planting committee would take the place of the tree warden because the job was so big that one person maybe was overwhelmed with it, and we didn't have the information that went.
I think that my feeling is that with Jane Phillips, we had a great tree warden who was really getting the job done in many ways. Am I correct?
It happens when you have a person step into a role that creates the role. The second
Hard.
person
It's very hard.
always has a very difficult time.
Absolutely, and I totally understand that, and, I never saw exactly what Jane did or anything like that. Okay, so, my understanding, I will take the bull by the horns here, okay? I will be chairman and temporary tree warden, okay? And see if we can put things
I think she wants the temporary in bold and caps.
And
in an order that we can converse about.
thank you. And I would, two things, right, is I would contact Tishkar, UMO, and I would talk to Dan about putting some language together. There is language in the bylaws, but I think you could fluff it up a little bit in terms of getting the word out there about your committee and
Committee members. Who do we normally go through to buy replacement trees? Is there somebody?
Well, that's one of the issues, because we always dealt with O'Donnell's, and O'Donnell's closed 2 years ago.
Okay, so we need a tree replacement person.
And I don't know where Gene Strauss was with the replacing those
Did I
ash
say
trees.
He said O'Donnell's.
You don't know,
So I
she's
don't, so
spoken
it
to
doesn't
somebody
mean,
on.
Well,
to the guy
I
out
think she was
tomorrow.
talking with the
I can't
people who
remember
took
his
the
name,
tree
you're right.
down,
Oh,
but I don't know.
and I don't mean
exactly
O'Donnell's.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Paul?
Okay.
Should we formally appoint Ms. Vicky as tree warden?
Temporary.
No, actually, I'm not.
Interim. I'm just gonna.
I would rather she continue as chair of the committee, and the position should go unfilled until we, there are quotes around that tree warden. I would, actually, I'd rather not, because it's a bylaws position, and I'd rather not go through the process right now.
Okay.
I'd rather get your report back
But
about
no
how to move
plan,
forward.
okay.
Okay,
Thank you. Yep.
thank you. That's report of the tree warden. Any other new and continuing business here? Reminder that our next meeting is January 14th, which is 2 months hence. Bill?
Well, I was just gonna ask Steve if he's gonna get the okay to pay some of these bills in December.
That was actually,
Yeah, we took care of that at the end of 2016, when we rewrote the warrant policy, and I now have authorization to do that every December.
Oh, so that's
good catch.
So like these trees that we just took down.
Yep.
All good.
oh, that doesn't need to be an item on the agenda. I know, I put it there because you
I
put it in your email to me.
I wanted to verify it.
Okay.
And I managed to have the time to dig it up while I was going.
So that's
While you're sitting
year to year. Thank you so much, I appreciate that. That said, sir?
Yeah, I just, Judy brought up a good point earlier about is the dock available to everybody, Northport residents? As you know, when we had damage a long time ago, there were funds from the mooring fees and things for the town that helped with some of our repair bills. As we are always trying to be thrifty, I was wondering if it made sense, since you're going to be meeting on Monday and there's going to be some talk about us needing to spend money to repair our causeway, whether there might be funds available from the town to help us with that. I just brought it up. I may not know all the information, but it seemed like this would be an appropriate time to ask, since it's just happened and since there's going to be a meeting on Monday. I don't know what you guys think.
That's, in the past, the tradition was that the excise taxes were shared, essentially. When we did the repairs in the dock in 19-diggity-doo, I don't know exactly when, you were very effective in getting a commitment of 50% of those fees brought back over. We've talked about that again, but in the context of waterfront restoration. Wouldn't it be great to reach into that pool? I don't know if you want to raise it, or
If you have bigger, if
Right
you want to
now,
ask for a bigger pile later on, you may not want to nickel and dime them now, but I just thought I'd bring it up as a possibility.
that's a great reminder, and I do see it as a nickel and dime. We went to them today for that 1,500 or so that we're looking at for the causeway, and said, can we have 750? I would prefer to say, we know you get 20,000 in excise taxes, can we have half of that when we get to that point? The other piece of that is the Small Harbor grant program, which a million years ago we applied for, and one of the, I think we got maybe 5,000 or so. But one of the conditions is, of course, it has to be a public pier. When the town always had that uninviting sign down at Saturday Cove forever about it's just for residents, they had to basically pull that down and back up in exchange for some of the money that they got for the granting that they just got. So we want to be more welcoming in any event. And legally, it is a public pier.
I've never experienced someone not feeling that they could use the pier, so. Paul?
What is the rationale or thinking from the village for sharing the cost of repairs to the wharf?
Well, it's a public pier, available
Public
to
pier.
everyone.
Lee?
I think this board ought to take into consideration, we are probably the richest part of Northport. Northport, we complain about the damage we incurred. This last storm was a lot worse for the rest of Northport. And I think we ought to maybe pull in our horns a little bit. If something comes up that we can't handle, then the time to go. But we ought to start thinking about, we're also residents of Northport, and we shouldn't go and ask and ask and ask.
Well, I think that was, Ned's point was just to serve as a public reminder that it is a resource, but not a resource we should be aggressive about reaching for.
But good counsel, Lee, thank you.
But in respect to what Lee says, if you go way back in the charter, the town kicked back, I think it was 2/3 of all property taxes back to the village. I mean, that'd be millions of dollars a year. We're settling for what, 25 grand?
25,000, yeah.
I mean, that's peanuts compared to the amount of money we kick into the town.
Right, and a lot of the money that goes from the excise tax, really, a lot of it comes from Bayside, because when you think about the number of boats in our mooring field that are paying for that money, so it's not, but I agree with you, Lee, that we have a lot more, we have a lot more finances here, and I always want to be thought of that we're a generous group rather than greedy, so, but.
Well,
Which is,
we've got, what, 4 grand left over for the year?
right.
Why don't we offer the town some money to help with their storm damage?
I'm still waiting for the 25,000 they owe us.
Yeah, that was note number 1 on the.
Till that
Look,
arrives.
I think they're very good to us, and I agree with the discussion in general. I think it'd be better to wait, stop and think about what our contribution to the town is versus what we may bring to the town as benefits, and approach them in a broader sense. It's been a long time since we took a look at that 25 grand.
I think the relationship between the village and town is better than I have ever seen it before.
It is.
This is in due to part of people sitting around here, Paul particularly.
Billy,
and
Drex.
Billy, yeah, and it's really great, because there was originally some true animosity.
Not very good.
It was very bad.
92.
And so this is excellent, and
So is that occasion then to meet and discuss that relationship, or are we merely, or is it fine just to accept it?
well, I
and
think
move forward?
Lee's point is very well taken. We should not just ask.
Right.
We should, but I think we need them to know that we're not asking. Does that make sense?
I don't want Paul to walk away from this meeting thinking he's got a direction of sitting there tomorrow and saying, oh, by the way, aren't we nice? We're not going to ask you for this money. I think silence in this instance is appropriate, because there is no direction to you to say that today, because we might be,
We haven't
might-
incurred any significant
right,
expense.
we've got a dock washout that really says we can handle, so I think we should
I'll
handle.
just beg for the 25,000.
Yeah, just remind them that that goes to,
No, I wouldn't do that either.
okay,
Thank you.
okay.
Just kidding.
Is there, do we tend to get it late in the year?
We can't get it until their taxes are collected. So anytime after their tax due date, which is September 30th, we sent them a request in October, I haven't seen the check yet.
I didn't-
So we're not far off at all.
Okay.
However, we don't have it.
Okay, scratch that idea.
Any further new or continuing business? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank
See
you
you
all.